Could we change that slide? Do you have a holding slide? No.
I have like an agenda slide.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
It's just Craig isn't up for 15 minutes. Perfect.
Okay, and then I'll swap the ones in between for you.
So I'm charging my phone.
That's fine.
Ignore it.
No problem. I'm the chair, yes.
Because I also.
Everyone, could we take a seat? We'll get started. Could we all take a seat, please? Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. I appreciate everyone's here on time, which is great. So we'll get started. We have some people streaming online, and we'll see how many we have in a few minutes. I'm going to start with Tomás O'Sheacón, who's the CEO of the Western Development Commission, who's going to do an introduction, and then we'll start into the programme fairly promptly.
Paul, thank you very much. Often in these situations, I come in and take all the credit for all the hard work that has gone in over many, many weeks. But that's absolutely the reason I'm here, for Helen and Orla and all the Western Development Commission team that have put so much work into gathering you all here today for what I think you'd agree is a very timely discussion, given everything that's happening at a national legislative stage and a national initiative stage. So, briefly to give you an overview of the work that we're doing in the Western Development Commission, this very much aligns with it. It was established over 20 years ago with excellence and knowledge in investment and lending, in policy analysis, and in regional development. One of the key things that we've set out over the next 5 years is to take both short, medium, and long-term views. So in the short term, this is the kind of work that we're doing, raising the profile of initiatives like this in the region, all the way from Donegal down to Clare. In the medium term, it's taking leadership roles in these kind of initiatives, again, where there's a need for delivery on the ground. And an example of that is the work we're doing with the government on the Atlantic Economic Corridor in terms of linking 101 hubs all the way from Donegal to Kerry. And finally, and perhaps most appropriately in the context of what's happening today, taking the long-term view. So both in terms of investment and lending. And I think there's a huge amount that both I and everybody else on the team and everybody else in the room can learn today about the opportunities that are going to present themselves in the coming years where we can support communities. So where we can show communities how it works, work with them to ensure that they understand the opportunities that are available, put the plans in place, and then finally perhaps to look at financing and lending that can make it all happen. So, from my point of view, tá fáilte roimh fad, guim gach rá ar an obair inniu, and I hope that you all have a very productive and fruitful day. And again, on behalf of the WDC team, can I thank you all for joining us here today in Athenry. Go míle maith.
So, thank you very much, Tomás. I have a couple of minutes just before we start to maybe do a little bit of a context setting of today. And I recognise there's a lot of people in the room, and a lot of people in the room have been, I suppose, trying to support the community energy sector, or campaigning, for want of a better word, for the community energy sector for maybe a decade or more, and looking at the opportunities from other countries, particularly Denmark and Germany. And it's great to see we now have a really robust buy-in at a political level, at a department level. I'm really looking forward to hearing the lessons learned from those countries, from Germany and Denmark. And in particular, I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going to come out from the department in terms of their view of how to support the sector. And I will say that I really think we're at a turning point. We've got real buy-in at a senior level in Ireland, and we have now, you can very clearly see buy-in from the people on the ground. And the challenge over the next few years is going to be to turn that into action. So I was just trying to think about a few milestones over the last decade or so. Obviously, we have only one community project, and when that was opened by Pat Rabbit, we used the opportunity to try and really encourage more the opportunity for citizen energy and engagement in the energy transition. We had the research paper from the National Economic and Social Council, which was really well put together and framed the participation needs and the deliberate need of an energy transition, and people need to be part of that transition. We had the Green and White paper as well, which there was a lot of sessions around consultation around the energy transition. They were in Dublin and around the country, and that was really interesting because government departments don't get out of Dublin very easily, and to see them to do a roadshow on the consultation, and then even the Minister this year to do the roadshow on the climate plan. I think it is very clear now that at a department level, but also at political level, that it is about people taking the energy transition journey and the government figuring out what the system change is to enable that, because I think it's very important. So I have been to Germany and Denmark and Austria and visited community energy projects, and I see the opportunity. We're going to talk a lot about electricity and biogas today. Heat is another opportunity. Denmark has a huge community-owned heat sector, and very similar climate to ours, which is certainly an opportunity. But if we maybe focus a little bit on the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme, which is what we're going to spend the morning talking about, I think it's important to say that the community sector, the community development sector, all of everything from social finance to the local development companies, the Western Development Commission in particular, UDROS, and all those other actors need to respond to the consultation, need to help and inform the department on how best to do this, because the energy transition happens on the ground. It happens to every building in every community. Every journey needs to take this journey, and it is really hard to put all of those things together from the ivory tower of central government with the limited resources of civil servants that we do have. So it's very important that the sector engages with the department and understands what is needed, so looks at the consultation document that's due out soon and responds to that effectively, coherently, with a bit of thought, so that the department can use those lessons, and I think that's very important. It's going to be difficult for anyone to develop renewable energy projects in Ireland. It's very difficult to build houses in Ireland. It's very difficult to do development of any kind in Ireland. And when you get into the challenges of maybe some of the larger scale investments of maybe a solar farm at 3 million or 4 million, or a wind farm, even a community one or a large scale one, they're challenging things to do. And we need to make sure that we understand how we remove the barriers for everyone, where the barriers are unnecessary, but also in particular for communities. So it is important to say that it is a very difficult thing to develop, and we have a huge challenge. We in Ireland have 7% heat, I think 30-odd%, 33% renewable electricity. We need to totally decarbonise over the next 20 years. Science might even say even less. So, we really need a lot of shoulders to the wheel, and it's important that it's not just developers. It needs to be across Ireland to bring that together. So I'm going to suggest we're going to see a couple of really interesting lessons learned from other countries, and it's important to say, Germany and Denmark led the way, and they're not in a great place at the moment, and our speakers are going to talk about that this is a real challenge for policymakers. So, we have to make sure that it's restrictive enough in terms of the community part of the development that it isn't open to all developers to put on a community coat and pretend we're communities, but at the same time open enough for communities to access the supports available for communities. So there's a real challenge in that space, and it's a really fine line. And every time there's a discussion to be had, it's really hard for us in the sector to figure out exactly what the right thing is. I think it's important that we support the department in understanding what do we need, but also what are the downfalls of asking for everything? So if we ask for example, in Germany, look, we don't want planning permission before a community group comes to the auction, but then everyone pretends to be a community group and puts in loads of things, and there's no success in the auction, or there's no success in projects. So that's very important. So please support them. And really, I suppose my final 2 points are. Our final point really is we have I suppose an opportunity now. So the department is going to spend the next 3 to 6 months putting together the framework, and then it will be over to us to deliver. And that's a really exciting space, and it's really exciting that some of the restrictions will be taken out. So I think the next 6 months is critical to inform, to make your voice heard, to listen to the reasoned arguments, to read the consultation papers, to read around them and read some of the research, and think about, what do we really need to make this a success? Because it's easy to think about the easy wins or the easy things, that this is a restriction for me, but understand that if all the restrictions are gone, it's very difficult for the community sector to be supported specifically, and not just the developer-led sector. So that's a real tightrope that the department needs to walk. So I encourage everyone to think, put your feet in Enda's shoes for a while, walk the walk for them for a while, and figure out what are the challenges they have and how you can support them with some real concerted action and thought. So look, that's my piece. I'm really excited for today. It's a brilliant agenda. It's extremely timely, I would have to say. It's unbelievably timely. And it's important that, I suppose, we learn those lessons from other countries. And I think what's really exciting about the next 6 months is that those lessons can be incorporated, because we're not first in this. Some would say we're in another part of the slide, but we can learn some lessons, and I think it's really important that we do. So the next speaker is Craig Morris, and despite his name, he is in fact German. So Craig, I suppose, has been very inspirational to me in terms of, he's written a number of different papers which have informed me of the lessons learned, and also informed the European Community Energy Coalition, and has a wealth of knowledge from the successes around and failures of the German Energy Wende. So I'll leave it to Craig to bring us some lessons from Germany. So thank you very much.
Yes, I'm a naturalized German, so I'll let you guess where I was born from my accent. I just wanted to start off by saying that I hope you all appreciate the special moment that you're in right now. I mean, look at this room. This is standing room only. Talking yesterday about 170 people who had registered, and 10% never show up, or 20% won't show up. This is happening. And can I get a number for the streaming? How many people are streaming in addition to the number of people here? Do we know that? Okay. Out of 170 registrations, okay? I have a little bit of an energy in EU member states. I don't see one that's more exciting than Ireland right now, okay, honestly. So enjoy the moment where you're at right now, and keep this momentum going. I'm from the Renewable Energy Agency in Germany. We have a number of programs right now, 3 that I want to mention that are talking about community energy at the European level. Ireland is involved in 2 of them. Do I have my people here from, I put up this screenshot from the top screenshot here is from the Twin Cities project on community energy. Do I have the people from Galway in the room here? Here we go. This is what I like to see. Galway is in the room. Do I have Dunleer in the, here we go. All right. So we are working, I'm not in this project, so I have actually not met you. Please, let's talk over coffee. But my colleagues are in this project, and we have other cities around Europe that are also involved. ACT now is with just the Baltic states, so I'm afraid Ireland can't be in it. But then LECO is the one that I'm in, and it's the one I wrote this paper for. So maybe somebody can hold up the booklet here. If you haven't received it yet, this is the printout. It's not even online yet. We went ahead and rushed the print to make sure we could get this done for the conference. So it's at present only available as this printout. And the reason why I think a lot of other member states want to talk to Germany about community energy is for this particular reason. This is one of two slides that I think have been the most viral for the Renewable Energy Agency. And what it basically shows is that we have, these are the numbers from 2016. So everything built up to and including 2016, not just the year 2016. And it shows that private individuals and farmers have built something like 40% of the renewable infrastructure that we have. And so this is where the reputation for Germany comes in. Unfortunately, I think 2016 was the last year where we've had a significant number of, or significant volume of citizen energy projects. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. We had the Renewable Energy Act that sort of drove this the whole time. It started in 2000. It was based on feed-in tariffs, which are administratively set rates for the energy set in consultation with industry. We began switching over to auctions, partly at the behest of DG Competition. The law was passed, revised in 2014, and then we started rolling out the auctions in the years after that. For PV, any PV project below 750, below that level, you can still build under feed-in tariffs. And that sort of market segment is still running at the level it was running at previously, which is fine. Above 750 kilowatts, you have to take part in auctions. You have to win an auction. And just so we understand how big that is, 750 kilowatts is several thousand solar panels. Okay, so you can have a pretty fair-sized solar project outside of auctions in Germany. The auctions themselves for solar are running quite well. One of the main concerns about auctions is you might have winning bids that then do not actually develop later, but we've had a realization rate near 100%, close enough. But the problem is, the main thing that people are complaining about for PV right now is we have this focus on best resources, right? We take the lowest price, and so you end up with projects, wind only in the windiest areas, solar only in the sunniest areas. And we've had rounds of auctions where 50% of the projects are in Bavaria. Okay, this is like an eighth of the country or something. And this makes sense only from a short-term economic power, lowest cost of energy standpoint. It doesn't make sense from the standpoint of what the Bavarians might want in the long term. And it doesn't make sense in terms of the total cost of system integration by 2050. It's just not going to work that way. Wind is the same. There's a carve-out below 750 kilowatts. This is kind of convenient because there are no turbines available below 800. At least I had a hard time finding one. So this is going to be streamed, so I didn't say the following. It's almost as though someone sat down and said, what's the smallest wind turbine? Set the carve-out below that. So we force everyone into auctions. And for biogas, and again, I'm going to show you some charts on all of this. I'm going through this quite quickly. For biogas, of course, the system sizes are different. So it's 150 kilowatts to 2 megawatts. But we have something similar for wind and biomass. We have undersubscribed auctions. Okay, so you tender, you have a call for maybe 100 megawatts and you get 30 or 50 in bids. So we're not even able to build what we are auctioning. For community projects, and this is something that the experts in community energy said, back in 2014 when we started implementing the changes, the risk of losing sort of poisons everything. There's a special reason why auctions are really bad for community projects. It starts off with just the paperwork needed to be done can easily cost $100,000, right? You need an environmental impact assessment usually, you need a permit, you put a lot of, you measure the wind resources and so forth. And there's no guarantee of success. And that's what feed-in tariffs actually fixed, right? You knew the price, you could do the calculations, and if you said, this looks like it might work, we'll proceed with the project. And now you just don't know if you can win the auction. Now, there are remedies for this. You can have lower requirements for citizen groups. You can have a fund that reimburses losses for community bids. But all of these incentives that you come up with are also an incentive for professional development firms to try to appear to be citizen groups, all right? And no country that I've seen, and certainly Germany, has not found a way to fix this, okay? So we incentivize the companies to sort of game the system, and we haven't figured out how to make that work. There's a difference in the ability of these different groups to absorb these losses from lost bids. If I'm a project developer, I may want to take part in 5 or 8 auctions, not all of them in a particular space. I may be working across the country. I may be working across the EU or even globally. And so I will spread my losses across various projects, right? So even in my work, if we place a bid for some call for a communications project, if we lose that, I don't stop. I have to bid again. It's my job, right? And that's the way professional development firms see these auctions. They have to bid again. For a community group, you usually only have one project that you want to do. And if you're developing something in Galway and you lose, you don't go, okay, let's look at Belfast next. It's just that's not the way they think, right? They have one project, and if they lose it, they will be so discouraged that they will give up, not try another one locally. If this was a wind farm, they're not going to try the solar roof on the school or whatever. And they're going to start to lose trust in the political system. They're going to think it's not there for them. And all of this is also related to the focus on best resources. So we're focusing on the best resources, solar where it's sunny, wind turbines where it's windy, in order to keep costs down. But this also means that any kind of market player that works nationally is at an advantage over a group that only works really locally. Now, again, there are some things that you can do to try to define what a community group is. We have the de minimis rule. I don't know how the commission is going to respond to this, but under the commission, it was 6 units or a maximum of 18 megawatts could actually, under EU law, go forward without participating in auctions. So again, the Germans did not adopt this. They went for 750 kilowatts, which is 0.5 megawatts. Another way of trying to make sure that a project is really a community project is you don't get to develop another one for the next few years, or you don't get to have another project down the street. So you don't take a big project and carve it up so that it fits into this small category. Another idea is to have a certain minimum number of citizens, and of course no single dominant shareholder. So you don't have one shareholder, something like that. And again, I've left the numbers out here because whatever works in one place might not work in another. So if 10 citizens works in one country, you might need 25 in another. Okay, this is not physics, social science. In Germany, what we had in the first 3 rounds of auctions for wind, for instance, was a minimum of 10 citizens had to be in the project. No shareholder could own more than 10%. The citizens had to have half of the voting rights, and local residents, half of the voting rights had to be in the county where the wind farm would be developed. And this is also kind of tricky because maybe the wind farm is on the county line, and so actually people just in the neighboring county will be affected as much as those within the county, so maybe a kilometer distance. And again, I'll come back to some of the specifics in just a second. Before I dive into the specific numbers, I wanted to just show you why I say this is not physics, this is social science. So the numbers are relative. This is a nice overview that the JRC did of the minimum distances that countries have implemented for wind turbines. And as you can see here, they range, most of them are around 500 meters. So you can't build a wind turbine within 500 meters of whatever they define as the built environment. It's usually not a single building, it's usually at least a certain number of buildings. So that definition also varies. But let's say it's 500. Notice that Scotland is 2,000. Scotland's fairly sparsely populated. So I looked up what are the numbers for the most densely populated countries in the EU. Well, look at that. Densely populated, 400. Belgium, densely populated, 400 and 600. And of course, Brussels is a city, so they don't allow wind turbines. But the correlation here is that when you have dense population density, higher population density, you actually are allowed to build wind turbines closer. Okay? And if you have an empty countryside like Scotland, then you can afford to have a much larger distance. But the fact of the matter is, if you have a road, you probably can't hear your wind farm. Okay, so all of this is very subjective. It's not like we can say the number for Ireland would be 500 or 750 or whatever. You have to actually go out and find out. You have to put up a number and see if it's accepted, and then do the footwork and convince people that wind power is good. And then this number becomes relative. All right, so here are some of the outcomes. These are the auctions for onshore wind. And what we see here is that in the first 3 rounds, we had a lot of this citizen energy that was built under these conditions that I showed you just a second ago. What happened was we had basically no actual citizen groups. These were all development companies that had basically sent their employees in and said, you guys look like a citizen group, and when you win the contract, you contract your company and you build it yourself. So it was 100% gaming. And just to make my point clear, I have nothing against these companies. The company that won the most in the first round, I actually love those guys. I have been following them for 10, 12 years. They're wonderful, really innovative. I have never said a bad thing about them. So these are not bad people. They are responding to, they have to run a business, and they are responding to the incentives we set, all right? The trick is, as policymakers, to figure out a way to give them their space and then actually keep citizen energy going. And what Germany did was they said, okay, they're gaming the system, so we cut back the incentives. They cut back the incentives, the gaming disappeared, but the community energy did not come. It's gotten so bad that the auctions are now undersubscribed. So what I mean by over and undersubscribed is, if you have 100 megawatts on tender and you get 200 as bids, it's 100% oversubscribed. If you tender 100 and you get 50 in bids, it's 50% undersubscribed. And we have now been, for the past 5 rounds, highly undersubscribed. Okay, so we're just not, we're tendering some amount and we get bids that don't even cover what's on auction. All right. The reason we did all of this was because we wanted the market to set prices. We switched to auctions because we wanted the market and not administrators, not the government, to set prices. That seemed to work well, and then as we continue here, we see that the maximum bid price is now the average price. Okay, so the administrators, whoever decides what the maximum bid price is now setting the market price as well. So that's no longer working. Okay, and the funny thing is, if you then take a look at those last 2 slides and say, well, why has citizen energy, why isn't it there? I mean, think about it. I said feed-in tariffs price, and you knew you were going to be able to build, and now we know the price, right? That's what this last slide is about. We know the price. It's the maximum price. They're all undersubscribed, so if you get your paperwork in order and you accept this price, it's build, okay? So why aren't community groups doing it? Oh, okay, I'll tell you what, you're my neighbor. Let's do this. 6 months, 6 to 8 months, we'll have our paperwork together. will go into that round of auction, but then he says, well, wait a minute, how do you know it's going to be that way in 6 to 8 months? There's no guarantee, right? So whatever the situation is today, by the time we get our act together, who knows? Maybe one company has come in and wiped everything up, and we 100,000 euros spread across 20 people. It's a lot of money for citizens, okay? For PV, we had a similar situation with the price development. Initially, the prices went down, then they have started creeping back up again. We're not exactly sure why that is. I put the old feed-in tariffs in there as a continued line. So the feed-in tariffs went down over time. They were scheduled to go down. And the funny thing about the comparison between auction prices and feed-in tariffs is that the auction prices are announced before the project starts. The feed-in tariffs you lock into when you actually start producing power and selling it to the grid, so at the end of the project. So it's always been an unfair comparison in a market, in a sector where prices really drop dramatically year to year. These projects have roughly 2 years to build, okay, these PV arrays. If you draw that line out by 2 years, you actually end up sometimes with lower prices than we would have had under feed-in tariffs, and sometimes with higher prices. Okay, so auction prices look better because we report future prices today in a market where prices are dropping for solar and wind year by year. So auctions have always looked better that way. It's almost inflated. For biomass, we have something similar. The bar here shows the amount that was on auction. So we had 133 megawatts, 233 megawatts, and so forth. I think this was 125 and these are 133. So the height of the bar is the total amount that was on auction. The green is how much will be built. That's already a problem. The yellow, or orange, it looks a little bit orange on the screen, is the number of bids that were sent in but lost. They were rejected. And the blue part, which is the biggest part of every bar, is the amount that was on auction but no bids were received. Okay? And if you think that is a dire situation, I put it into context with what was built going back to the early aught years. You can see this was an up and down market, right? So the orange bar shows how much biomass units we built per year. But again, this is what we're auctioning today. It's this little bit down here. If you wanted just to have a renewal rate, just to keep the level stable, you would need something like 300 megawatts a year, because we have around 6,000 and with a 20-year service life. So again, we're only building the green part and we're only auctioning the height of the bar. Okay, so this is really slowing down. Now I said we had 2 graphics that went viral. So this is the second part of my presentation, the second chart. This is about why people are reacting, why we're not building, for instance, a lot of biomass. People have responded to the growth and said, wait a minute, this is competition between food and energy production. They're responding to wind turbines by saying, why are you industrializing our landscapes? So I want to talk for a minute about why these things happen. This particular chart is, along with the one I showed you before about community energy, the shares of community energy. This is our most popular chart. It shows a couple of things, but what it doesn't show is the way it's often read. It's often read to communicate that if you're developing a renewable energy project, you don't need to worry about citizens rejecting you because they like renewables. What it actually shows is a couple of things. It shows that renewables are more popular than fossil and nuclear. It shows that regardless of technology, people who live close to one already accept it more. It's also the case for coal power. Okay, so 37% of people currently living next to a coal plant think it's a fine technology, it's okay. They wouldn't mind living next to one, whereas only 7% who don't live next to one would like to have one. But it doesn't actually show us that people will like a wind farm if you propose it. In fact, around half to a third didn't say they liked it. So, and that's a pretty significant number, all right? So what we need to understand is when we go into a community and propose, for instance, a wind farm, we're not asking people what we're asking here. Here we're saying, do you like wind turbines or gas turbines? When we go into a community with a project, like a wind farm, we're asking people before and after, not wind turbine or gas turbine. Do you like your community the way it is, or do we get to develop infrastructure here, before and after? And it's a fundamentally different issue. And I go into detail about this in the paper about how if we tell people they are NIMBYists, right? You like the energy transition, you're worried about climate change, but you don't want anything in your backyard. This is just showing how arrogant we are. Okay? We're just calling them names, and we're communicating to them that we're not taking them seriously. We think they're hypocritical. Okay? So we need to step back and understand that people have real concerns, all right, when we come into their communities and build infrastructure. This little bit's in German, but I translated it down here. The technology comparison that we just saw is only one of 3 major pillars. This is from environmental psychology, okay? It's only one of 3 pillars of acceptance. So what technology you plan to build is only one of the 3 aspects you need to take into account. The other 2 are the process itself and distribution. So the process is, okay, so you want to develop a wind farm and you've done an environmental impact assessment, so you paid 20,000 or whatever euros to this guy who says the park's going to be fine for birds. Well, yeah, I mean, if you pay him 20,000, he's going to tell you the birds are okay. Do you trust the process, right? Do citizens trust that the environmental auditor can actually come back to you and say, don't build it here, move it down the road, you're in the way of the birds? Trust that. I've heard this from Denmark, maybe Louise can tell us this in a second. I've heard that the Danes don't trust their own city government sometimes and have said things like, or that sometimes they suspect that the city officials just want the tax revenue, right? So go ahead, build near us, give us the tax revenue, and we'll keep the citizens quiet. But again, I'll let her comment on that. I'm not the Dane here. The distribution justice is the issue. The best example is from the Netherlands. So they found out a few years ago that one farmer was getting 2,000 a year and the neighbor was getting 1,000 a year in the land lease for the wind turbine. And everybody found out about it, and then they were like, why are you getting 2,000? It's the same turbine. Why do you get more than me? The government stepped in and said, we don't care if it's 2,000 or 1,500 or 5,000, just you sit down and figure this out. So they had a huge stakeholder thing, kind of like your citizens' assembly, by the way, which was amazing. Like, we are so envious of that citizens' assembly. The Dutch sat down and did something similar. They came out with one price. So now if you own land and they build a wind turbine, there's a price that you get and there's no discussion. So the who benefits more than others debate is over in that respect. So these are the kind of issues we need to look at. One thing that my company did a few years ago, because all of these projects that we're talking about, they may not have a 7-figure budget. We may be talking about 6 figures in a lot of cases. And trying to then calculate, what are the local benefits of that? That can cost a lot of money. You don't have the money if your project budget is $700,000. You don't have $30,000 to calculate, what the local benefits are. So we came up with an online calculator in German, but this is something you could think about doing because citizens don't want to be paid off, right? If I don't like a wind farm, you can't come up to me and say, but you can buy shares in it. Because if I don't like something, I'm not going to buy it, right? But if my community benefits, if you can tell me my community benefits, then I don't feel like I'm being paid off, but I feel like my entire community is benefiting. And so how do we calculate that? And then how do we communicate it? Well, the first step is, of course, to input these things like what bank is doing the loan, where's the bank located, the insurance, the manufacturer's probably from out of town, but maybe there's somebody in the supply chain locally who's doing the operations and maintenance. Did you create 2 jobs locally for this? Where's the tax revenue? Like, what part of the tax revenue is really coming into your local economy, however you define local? And once you have calculated that, then you actually have to actively communicate it, okay? Because people are not going to know. I think we've all come to a better understanding over the past few years that perceptions are, and facts that are not understood also don't exist, actually. So we have to communicate these things as well. And so you might want to consider coming up with some kind of online calculator for that. Once you've done that, it's not the end of the story, and I apologize for yet another German graphic here, but I couldn't find the original. But what you see here is various aspects in the middle, like land leases, jobs, tax revenue. These are the things you calculate. And then for the communication aspect, you communicate those numbers, but you also communicate these other things that are non-monetary and hard to put into numbers. So for instance, just the trust and the participation that your citizens will have, the increased participation that your citizens will have in local decision-making. That's a benefit and a value in and of itself. And tourism is also listed here. And I just want, is that 5 minutes or 3? 5. Okay, then I'm good. This is one example of tourism. So this is a community in a sort of low-income area without any industry in Germany. It's sort of over near France and Belgium. And they had an idea in the 90s to build over a valley there, to build the world's largest suspended footbridge. And they didn't have the money. And then somebody developed this wind farm. Now, I don't know how well you can see this, but those are wind turbines. And this is the footbridge, okay? The wind farm came in, was built, and they started kicking back some of the money into the community budget. And then they remembered this old idea, and they said, yeah, let's do it now. We got the money. Admission is free. If you can stomach walking across this thing, I haven't seen one this big, but I've tried to do smaller ones. It's really frightening. My knees give way. But it's free if you can manage it. They make money just by bringing in the tourists. So the hotels are full, the restaurants are full, and this has led to, this community being one of the most financially sound in this struggling region, okay? So they're taking some of the revenue and thinking of ways to reinvest it to bring other people in. At the same time, I have to issue one final warning before I give you my last recommendations. I've been doing this and traveling to various places. Really, it was North America, trying to get other countries to copy what Germany was doing. And we were successful in Ontario. And the result in Ontario, they sort of adopted German-style feed-in tariffs around 2008, I think. And the result was the biggest backlash against wind power that we've ever seen. And the reason was, we found out that this mechanism, we thought it would pull the community groups into the energy sector. And it turns out that the law that facilitates community energy, it doesn't pull a string, it pushes a string. You can't actually incentivize community energy with a law. The communities in Germany brought about the law. The community, the grassroots movement in Germany brought about the law. It pulled the law into existence. In other words, if your communities are not in the starting blocks ready to go, if they're not monitoring the legal changes, then when you give them the legal changes, the people are not sitting there monitoring this, and they're not going to get started. The people who are going to get started are the development firms who are monitoring the policy changes. And so Ontario was swamped with professional development firms developing projects. There were some, I don't want to undersell the success, there were some community groups that got started, but we learned a really painful lesson here. The law does not create the grassroots movement. In Germany, the grassroots movement literally created the law, okay? So if your citizens are not in the starting blocks ready to go, and I don't know this, you tell me, the law's not gonna get them interested. So we have to think about ways, give them the law, give them the space, give them the incentives, and then think about ways to actually get this going. My recommendations, I kind of almost want to skip the top ones because we've talked about them already. I'm just repeating myself. But these have been coordinated with groups like RESC, DGRV in Germany. So these are not just my ideas. This is sort of my synopsis of what European community energy groups are calling for. And I've left out the numbers intentionally. So the minimum number of locals should be large. I didn't say 50, I didn't say 25 or whatever, because you have to figure this out in Ireland. I can't tell you, right? Nobody knows. Just figure it out. Work with your people. The one that I would really is number 5, because I haven't mentioned this one before. Create a one-stop consulting shop to provide community groups with expertise and to access applications. Now, I don't know that I'm going to get this right. Orla was telling me yesterday about some idea or project, maybe it's already running, where you have somebody in every community sort of acting as a facilitator. That's kind of what I'm talking about here. And it's also going to be the point, if this person is a facilitator, it's going to be, part of that person's job is going to be getting citizens excited about these projects, okay? So have some expert. They don't have to know how to develop the projects themselves, but they need to know how to navigate the paperwork. And so the citizen groups who are interested, they would go talk to this person. That person would give them feedback, and when they apply for stuff, that person also reviews these things so that we don't end up with rejected applications because of formal errors, right? And I don't know what organization, you have so many organizations here today, and I'm sure they all want to be this one-stop consulting shop. That's a fight for you to have. But something like that would be very good. Germany didn't have something like this, but we had other things like the KfW Bank, which backed loans, low-interest loans for renewable energy projects. So people who wanted to do something could go down to their savings and loans bank on the corner, and the banker could just pull out a 2-page form and fill it in, and it was all ready to go. You didn't have some grand review that could slow you down. So we've had similar things in Germany, but the one-stop consulting shop is where we are now at the European level in terms of proposals. So I guess I'm finished then. Oh, one last note. I wrote a history of what happened in Germany, and you're welcome to buy it, but you're also welcome to write me an email and say, send me that PDF. I'm willing to read a PDF. Everybody who writes me gets a PDF of this book. All right, thank you. Since we're online, I'm going to get millions of requests now.
Thank you very much, Craig. I think that was very good, very inspirational. I would encourage everyone to read the policy summary that is available here today, particularly in formatting response to the consultations that come out from CERU that's available at the moment. I know Enda has been working hard on another consultation on the RES. The wind energy guidelines consultation is due out very soon. Greenhouse gas consultation, the NECP consultation, and so on. So I would encourage all of that. The SEC program, I'm presuming, is what Craig was mentioning. And one lesson I found quite interesting in terms of the one-stop shops. There's a region in Upper Austria that has one-stop shops for energy efficiency, really, rather than renewables, but also covers things like district heating. The consultants that operate out of that, or the employees of that regional government one-stop shop, participate in 20 days minimum mandatory CPD per year, because this sector is evolving so quickly. So it's really important to keep them upskilled, and I think that's maybe a lesson for the community energy mentors, of which there are some in the room. if you're going to mentor a community about building a solar farm or a wind farm or planning permission or so on, you need to be in a position to know what you're doing. I'm just going to take a tiny second just to maybe plug something. There's a Green Tech SkillsNet training bursary put together by the Irish Wind Energy Association and administered by ourselves for anyone in the community energy sector. There's a flyer being handed around. I know it's on a lot of desks. So if you are interested in that training program, we want to know what training is required. So there's a survey that's out. And if you're interested, you can either follow the Energy Agency's newsletter, or if you email Stephanie at tipenergy.ie, which is on the bottom of that, and just register your interest, she'll send you the link for the survey. And as a result of that survey, we will have a particular training program for the community energy sector in 2020. So the next speaker is Louise Crowe from the Sustainable Energy Planning Research Group in Aalborg University. And Aalborg has been very much at the forefront of research around particularly the heat roadmap for Europe, the integration of smart energy systems where sectors are coupled between heat, electricity and transport. And Louise is going to present some lessons from Denmark in the energy transition. So over to you, Louise. Sorry, one tiny bit before Louise. All the presentations will be circulated at the end of the session today.
So, hi, I've agreed to come and talk about lessons from Denmark within community ownership energy. So first, just to say who I am, I'm Louise Crowe from Aalborg University. I have a PhD in local strategic energy planning from a municipal perspective, where we also look into community ownership as one of the things that you can promote in the municipalities. I'm a part of the Sustainable Energy Group in the Department of Planning at Aalborg University. So going into community energy ownership, first of all, there are a lot of, why should we talk about that? That's because there's a lot of long-term benefits and also direct benefits when we talk about local citizen ownership. And I can see that not all my slides are not really good at this. But maybe if you take the, I have a PDF as well. That might be better.
Let's try.
Yeah. Just a second.
Yeah, it looks like the whole screen is changed. Yeah.
It's just a projector.
Is it the projector? Yeah.
This is not easy to do on the fly.
Do you have a PDF?
I have a PDF.
Can we try the PDF? Take this out and pop it in. I have no idea.
Yeah, try that.
It's the
try that.
settings as it's set up for a wider
Try something.
screen. That's actually a
Go-
square screen.
Yeah, go 1280.
Yeah.
See.
So you need to go like as if
Yeah,
it's
just
a square.
change it. Yeah.
And then try your PowerPoint again.
It's one of those.
Yeah, something like that. Did anything change between mine and this one?
No. No.
Yeah, for some reason
Say it again.
it's not.
The top. You have it. You have it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You fixed it?
Try that. Please work.
no, hang on. Bear with me.
Yeah.
This is not what I want to do, but we'll see if it works. It's gone the wrong way around. It's gone the wrong way around. Yes,
It may be the size of the slides
it
itself.
is. Yeah, no, I think it
It's
is.
a design
Yeah,
I'm
we
pretty sure.
should,
PowerPoint on design
we should be okay.
or page layout. I can't remember which.
There it is.
Perfect.
Do you want the pointer plug him back in? Yes. Thanks, Paul.
No problem. Stay close to the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think we're ready again. Sorry about that, but now you can actually see my slides as well. So yeah, what I was saying is that why do we talk about community ownership and citizen ownership? And that's because citizens ownership is actually have a lot of benefits, both short term but also long term. And some of the short term is knowledge skills, development in local societies, social capacity, also affordable energy access. If it's owned locally, we can actually maybe also lower the prices. And then an increased support for renewable energy, because if you own the energy system, then you are also more likely to have a support for the transition towards renewable energy in the overall perspective. And some of the long-term impacts are socioeconomic regeneration and empowerment. And when we talk about citizen ownership and participation, we have this ladder of participation, where there's a lot of different degrees of participation, and some will say they are involving the citizens when they are on the lower parts of this ladder. But when we talk about citizen ownership and involvement and active involvement, we are only talking about the higher steps, where we actually give some of the power to the citizens and partnership with the citizens and give them some control. That is sometimes a problem when we talk about the national level and also the municipalities, that they will not give up control to the citizens. But that's actually what we need to do if we should make 100% transition to renewable energy. So I talk from the perspective of Denmark, and to do that we also need to understand what we are talking about when we talk about the energy system in Denmark. Because we are starting to talk about smart energy systems, where we don't see the energy sectors as different sectors. We see them from a holistic perspective, where we see the synergies between the sectors and the energy system as one whole, you can say. So everything is connected, and we benefit from the synergies between them. And that also means that we include both the production side and the demand side, meaning that we are actually moving the production of the energy out in the local societies, close to the consumers, and the consumers are also a part of the energy system. Because, for instance, we talk about district heating in Denmark, and we are now talking about low temperature district heating, and if we are supposed to do that, we also need to lower the consumption in the houses, and therefore we need to engage the public to renovate the houses so that we can actually do this. So therefore everything is connected. And if we look at the numbers within Denmark and the energy system, then we have in 2017 we had 43% of the electricity consumption was from wind energy. And if you're looking into the district heating, 58% was from renewable energy. And 66% of the households were actually connected to the district heating grid. And then our goals in Denmark is to be 100% renewable in 2050, and then our new government actually came in with a new goal last year, or this year, to have a 70% CO2 reduction by 2030. And that is what we are going to work towards right now. And citizens, if we look into citizens' ownership in Denmark, in 2016, we had 52% of the total installed wind capacity had some degree of citizen ownership. I will not say it was citizen ownership projects, but some degree was in them. And then if we look at the district heating sector instead, we had 96% of the district heating demand was supplied by municipal companies and consumer cooperatives. We have around 400 district heating companies around Denmark, small companies that are actually citizen owned in small cooperatives. And one of the benefits is that we have quite a low price on district heating in Denmark due to the fact that these companies are not allowed to actually earn a profit. These community-owned companies are there for the consumers and to secure a low price on district heating. So that's a really good example of how we have used community energy within the Danish energy sector. So if we look at the wind sector for the onshore and offshore open door projects in Denmark, we have had a lot of different subsidies going from that has changed over the time, going from guaranteed fixed prices to fit-in tariffs over a period. And if we look at how the rules in the legislations have led to community-owned energy in Denmark, we can look at how the rules also have changed over time, because back in 1986 to 1997 we had something called bopælskrav, and I have tried to translate this into residence criterion. I don't know if it's the right translation. But that meant that if you're going to build a wind turbine, then you needed to have some kind of local connection. You had to live within the municipality, or if you wanted to be a single owner, you actually have to own the land that you're putting up the wind turbine on. That was later changed to where the local connection meant that you had to live within Denmark, but still local in that way. It was a national perspective. And that was actually where we came from with wind, and the way we actually got a lot of community-owned wind in Denmark over time. But then in 2000 to 2008, we actually removed this residence criterion, which actually made the incentive for local ownership disappear from the legislation. And then instead we started to see a lot of large investors come in instead and invest in the energy transition. And then to try to actually get more local citizens ownership in, we back in 2008 made this køberetsordning, which is an option to purchase shares. By law, if you're building an energy project, you have to offer 20% of the project to the local citizens for them to buy shares. However, that has not worked out really well, because people can buy the shares and then they can sell them at a higher price to large investors afterwards, and there's not been a lot of control with that people are actually living within the area when they're buying them. So it hasn't worked that well as it was supposed to. And therefore, right now, the government is out saying that we are going to put that to rest, and now we're going to make some new rules. They have not yet been implemented, but what they're talking about here is, rather than saying that local citizens can buy shares, then they can actually get a compensation when you live close to the wind turbine, and that compensation is really small compared to if you can own a share. I can't say that much more about it, rather than we in my energy group, research group, actually think that this is a really bad idea, because through compensation you are not engaging people to actually own something, and you're not getting the support. Yes. So also just to visualize how this changes in the rules and regulation have actually impacted the development in Denmark. I have this figure that shows that back with the old rules, we had a lot of citizen ownership built, and even though we still have a lot of capacity in looking at the large investors, but if you look at small projects, there was actually a lot of different projects in Denmark with farmers putting up wind turbines in local areas and so on. And the further we get away, the more we only see these large companies come in and invest instead of local citizens. So what we've done is that we have moved away from local and inclusive planning, you can say, within the energy system, to a more distant and exclusive ownership models. So we are moving away, which is not a good thing from our perspective, from the local ownership models in Denmark right now. And if we look into the projects that they say that are collective ownerships of wind corporations and wind guilds, that I have now tried to explain with exclusive memberships, meaning that we actually have projects with different amounts of shareholders. And if we look into these projects, which should be collective citizens or citizens projects, then we see that a lot of them actually have more than not more than 0 to 5 owners, and that meaning that it's still large ownerships within these. If it should be community-owned projects, then we are assuming that there should be at least 50 shareholders. And if we look at the graphs, we see that only 20%, less than 20% have these more than 50 shareholders. So there's a large tendency in Denmark towards these exclusive membership owner models, you can say. And does that actually give more decision powers to citizens? No, not really. And it doesn't distribute the benefits and losses. Local acceptance, we see a lot of resistance towards especially wind turbines in Denmark right now, and it doesn't really make any local development. However, we do have some examples where we actually have really good examples of local ownership. We have Middelgrunden in Denmark. It's 20 nearshore wind turbines just located outside Copenhagen, where 10 of these wind turbines is owned by local citizens in Denmark. It's a national cooperative with more than 8,000 members across Denmark. And that project actually went really well when they tried to do that, and with only a little resistance. And another project is in Hvide Sande, where they needed to do something in order to maintain the sustainable tourism and also an expansion on the harbor for local development, so that they put up 3 large wind turbines where they put up a local foundation which were owning 80% that could feed into the local community to support the harbor and the sustainable tourism. And the last 20% was owned by 400 members of the local community. And what they actually managed to do with this project was to have no complaints at all due to the local integration in the society, you could say. So, and then just to say how electricity prices in Denmark and the spot market prices in Denmark actually have an influence on the local community ownership models as well, is that if we see that the average price received by wind is way lower or is lower than the average price for electricity. And that could be a problem if we don't have these feed-in tariffs anymore, because local communities and local community energy projects are very vulnerable to the uncertainties in the markets more than the large actors are, and therefore it is a problem for the development of local projects. And then we have also turned into auctions in Denmark and tenders in Denmark, and we had our first tender back in 2018. And what we saw from the result of this tender was that we didn't have any community-owned energy projects that won the bidding. We managed to find out 4 of these, where we can see that it is large consumer cooperatives and large commercial investors that had won the bids on the onshore wind turbines, which here is called landvindmøller. And then we have one photovoltaic that is owned by a local individual owner. So again, we see that it's difficult to get the community ownership in. And one example of how difficult it is to get these community energy in is an example of a tender from 2014, where we had a local NGO called Wind People in Denmark. They made a project called Wind and Welfare, where they tried to organize a bid for 350 megawatt nearshore wind turbines. And they actually managed to get shares or get people involved so that they could sell shares that corresponded to their consumption of their electricity consumption. But in the end, they couldn't really get into the bidding because of the contract notice requirements to qualify for the pre-qualification. Because one of the requirements was that they had to have a minimum turnover of 4 billion Danish kroner, and that's not possible if you are a local citizen organization. So they didn't manage to actually do this. But another thing that because they had a lot of discussion going on with the Danish Energy Agency, and one of the things that came out was also that the Danish government don't see offshore wind as a small thing. They see it as big business and only something for the large companies, and that is really a big challenge if you want to have more local ownership. So what can we learn from Denmark? We can learn that all the institutional incentives have strong influence on ownership. So what you do nationally or centrally is actually have a strong influence. We have had a lot of ownership in Denmark, and that has actually promoted a lot of the transition we are in today. And there are a lot of different models for community ownership, and they can be used to raise local acceptance and local development, and also influence the energy prices. So our recommendations are actually that when we are making these tenders, that we should secure that they are right and secure an active involvement of local and public actors within the development of these tenders. The tender materials should not exclude public projects on forehand. It needs to be able to have everybody included. One idea could be to separate community and commercial tenders, but talking to Germany, that might not be a good idea. There could be some issues that we need to look into anyway. And then, as also mentioned before, was that there are some issues when you, there are some challenges when you are a community project. So some kind of process support in the shape of maybe supporting funds or a secretary that could actually help these local projects to get in on the bids on equal terms as the larger commercial actors, that would be beneficial. And then I was asked to just introduce biogas in Denmark and how we have biogas. So in Denmark we actually have 166 biogas plants in Denmark. And a lot of them is actually locally owned by farmers. It's farm plants that we have in the end. There's 55 is actually farm plants that are owned by local farmers. And you can see in the figure we have them scattered all around Denmark, and there's a lot of the small locally owned plants. And we can see that the expected production is actually raising pretty well from 2012 up to 2020, where we are going from an electricity production, and then now we are also having a lot of upgrading to the natural gas, and some is used for process, and a little amount is only used for heat. So the legislation for biogas in Denmark is that we have such subsidy schemes for biogas, depending on the purpose, if you're using it for electricity, upgrading to the national gas network, for transport, or whatever you're using it for. And then a lot of the biogas is also excused from energy taxes and CO2 taxes. But right now they are again changing the subsidy schemes, so I don't know how they will look like in the future. But what is said is that they are actually, the existing biogas plants can keep their support up to 2032. So that was just a really short introduction to the biogas in Denmark. And I'm done.
So thank you very much, Louise. It was a really interesting piece on the home of wind energy, really, in terms of Denmark, where there are lessons that we've learned from Denmark, but I think there's a lot more to learn, and it's interesting to see the movement away from citizen ownership, and it's not seen as a very positive thing. So next up is Enda Gallagher from the Department of Communications, Climate Action and Environment. You can all read Enda's bio to find all about Enda. But Enda, I suppose, is tasked with the real challenge in Ireland in trying to develop a sector that really doesn't exist quite just yet, which is a challenge in itself as part of the new Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. And I think in the context of today's presentation, it's worth noting that the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme is trying to stimulate an investment of somewhere in the region of 8 gigawatts of renewable energy over the next 10 years. And it's quite that is a huge amount of investment in the roughly 10 billion or so. So the community energy part is a small part of the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme, but it's seen as the key enabler. And that monkey is currently on Enda's back. So Enda's going to tell us all about where the support scheme is, and I'll leave it over to Enda to do the rest.
Hello everybody. I have the dubious privilege of trying to follow my colleagues in Denmark and Germany, world leaders in renewable and community energy. And as Paul has outlined, Ireland just isn't at the races in terms of community energy to date. And I suppose that's the starting point for where we are at. I suppose any good therapist will tell you need to start dealing with the problem by recognising it, and that is the problem. I mean, essentially we have one community energy project in Ireland today, Temple Derry. I see John Fogarty is in the audience. John and his comrades have have done amazing work to get that project off the ground, given the challenges that exist for community energy in Ireland to date. And I suppose, you know, for me as an ordinary Irish citizen first and foremost, but particularly with my energy official hat on, I genuinely find that that's an affront to me that we only have one community energy project in Ireland. So essentially what we're about today and the process that we're going through right now is to deliver a flourishing community energy sector starting in the next few years, but I suppose realistically it's going to kick off slowly. It's going to take a couple of projects to get going before we can genuinely build. And what we're trying to do essentially at the moment in terms of policy is to put in place the structures and the supports to deliver. So it might be just useful to take a step back initially and ask ourselves why? Why do we care about community energy? And essentially I think there's a lot of very good reasons. I think the critical one really is the one in the middle there, guaranteed revenue streams. Essentially, through the government scheme that we're promoting today, community projects can have access to a guaranteed revenue stream if they get a contract through that scheme. Essentially around 15 years lifespan, and that guaranteed revenue stream coming into citizens and communities around the country can make a huge contribution to the regeneration of particularly rural Ireland, obviously. And there's a whole bunch of other benefits. They've all been explored extremely well in research that's out there. I see Claire Watson in the audience has done great research in this area, and others. So there's a lot of genuinely important social reasons for trying to kick off a community generation sector. So getting back to the simple goal that we have, getting to 2025 with community projects in existence. What do we need to do to deliver on that? Well, we have to apply policy and we have to provide supports. I'm just in general terms, I at sort of conferences I've spoken at before, I would take considerable time talking about the policy. Today we need to get into the details, so in one slide I'll sum it up. And essentially I think my main message on this would be, and I think Paul alluded to it earlier, there's a huge groundswell of support at almost every level of society now for community energy. On the left-hand side there, I've just outlined a few of the key official policy statements, all of which are calling for the delivery of community energy and getting communities and citizens involved in what we call the energy transition, the move to decarbonise our economy. And then on the right-hand side, we have what I would call citizen and public policy calls. So these are things like the Citizens' Assembly, the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Climate Action, and I could even add yourselves into that category there. Paul mentioned the word campaigners earlier. People like yourselves and NGOs who have actually been approaching government, approaching officials saying we need to get this thing started and so on. So at the moment there's a brilliant policy, there's an alignment of all of that. So that is helpful to us in terms of getting this thing done, but it's still complex. So what is it? I suppose we're trying to bring policy and supports together to deliver this, and essentially this is the vehicle for delivering this is the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. That's the main delivery vehicle. There are other ones, there's other good stuff going on in terms of community energy that I won't have time to talk about today, but the main one we're focusing on is the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. We've heard some commentary, particularly from Craig already, about what schemes nowadays have to develop through an auction format. But I think, and that isn't ideal for communities, let's be clear about that. But what we're trying to do is ensure that communities have their own separate category within these auctions, so that at least you've got a fair chance of competing and winning in the auction rather than going up against the big professional developers. And in the framing of this scheme that was signed off by government in July of last year, we essentially wrote communities into that high level design front and centre essentially. So now it's about delivering on that. Just very quickly, I suppose, as Paul mentioned, communities is one important component of the scheme, but in reality, we need a huge amount of renewable energy to come through the system in the coming decades, and the scheme is to deliver on all of that. Okay, so there are essentially 4 community pillars within the context of the scheme, and Paul mentioned public consultation. We're going out to public consultation tomorrow or Friday on the approach to the overall scheme, and within that there's obviously going to be sections on the community proposals that we have. Here today you're getting a preview of those, and I think it's only appropriate. You actually for once are special in this. You're getting this ahead of the formal launch, and I got approvals from the highest levels in my department to be able to speak to you on these. There are 4 pillars. 2 of them relate to community projects. So we want to get communities generating their own electricity, running their own projects and so on. And in order to do that, then we need to put in place what we're calling an enabling framework. Essentially that supports to deliver and to handhold communities through what is a very complex process. I mean, electricity generation is not simple. But at the same time, communities throughout Ireland have a proud record of delivering on all sorts of things, everything from, the GAA, tidy towns, and maybe more importantly in this context, group water schemes. We've got the guts of 5,000 group water schemes in existence from over the decades. So I believe communities can deliver their own projects, but it still isn't simple, and we do need to handhold them through the process. The second set of 2 pillars are in relation to developer-led projects. So fine, the focus today is primarily on the community-led, but a large proportion, obviously, of the projects in this scheme are going to be run by professional developers. They will be big projects, massive capital investment. So we want to ensure that communities and citizens have a part of those as well. And there are 2 pillars that we are presenting in relation to that. One is there's a mandatory community benefit fund, and then secondly, there's a mandatory investment offering. So a big developer has to give an ownership or an investment offering to local communities. Okay, so the main challenges, and I'll go through most of these one by one in one slide, one topic. So state aid requirements, the definition, every single meeting that I've had in the last year and a quarter that I've been working on this, one of the topics that has arisen is the definition. Then we have to look at all of the other things that I've mentioned and how we can build a proper system of support and so on, and make sure that it's tight. We've heard about the possibility of developers gaming the system and so on. So we're looking at all of this in terms of challenges. And then 2 at the bottom that I've raised, these to date have been the critical challenges for communities to deliver community projects in Ireland: grid connection and financing. So state aid is essentially a big challenge for us in terms of competition. So it's EU competition law. In fairness, it's there for a good reason. It's trying to protect consumer interests. It's trying to ensure that public money offered to sectors isn't badly spent, and more importantly, doesn't distort competition. So it means that when a government like ourselves now is bringing a scheme to Europe for approval, we have to ensure that it ties in and lines up with existing state aid legislation. There is a really strong challenge in this for us because it's a serious process, and they have challenged all 4 of those pillars that I've mentioned. In particular, they don't like the idea of communities having a separate category in the auction. So it is critical that we deliver that. If we don't, we are considering plans B, C, D and whatever, but not going to talk about them today. I'm still taking the view that we will get this through, but we can't be sure. So essentially, we've made a very strong business case, looking at this from a holistic perspective, saying that it's not just about financials, it's about all these other benefits to rural communities and so on. And that process is ongoing. We were out there most recently, just a fortnight ago. We're out there again next Wednesday and so on. So hopefully we can get that concluded by February of 2020, February next year. In terms of the public consultation, this is the first thing to really throw out at you. We are proposing a definition that includes those characteristics for communities. So essential, and we want feedback on this, and when I say feedback, I mean it might be just a paragraph in an email that you send to us to either support or improve these characteristics as we see them. We're trying to keep the projects small because we believe most community projects in reality are small, so 5 megawatts. We want open access for citizens to join this project wherever that project is, and we want participation to be open to locals first, but then extended nationwide if necessary to ensure that we get community projects off the ground. We're suggesting a minimum of 150 participants will need to sign up to these projects, and that is essentially to try and maintain cooperative principles. You either have to set up a co-op or a PLC or something else that I haven't heard of. And essentially the co-op principle there, one person, one vote. We also want to embed the sustainable energy communities in this process. Many of you out there are already members of those. We want SECs to be at the heart of any community project going forward, and if there isn't one in existence in your area and you think you have a project, you need to set one up. Other entities will be allowed to join in as well as SMEs and local authorities because they're useful in terms of funding and so on, and expertise. And we're also proposing that after the return on investments offered to investors, which are normal and appropriate rates of return, after those, then the primary purpose of 51% of the profit thereafter is to go into community initiatives. Okay, so we'll be happy to talk about that in the Q&A maybe, and also to take your feedback. Actually, I'll jump forward to here. I've mentioned the auction category. So the definition is critical for deciding what projects go into the community category in the auction. Okay, so obviously only those that comply go in there. And then we've already committed in government to this range of supports to be put in place. Trusted intermediaries who are essentially mentors, trusted advisors who give specialist expertise to communities. Financial supports will include feasibility grants, 25 or 30 grand, and what we're calling soft development loans up to around 150, 175,000. So these are real meaningful supports that will deliver this sector, assuming you come on board and work with us and the agents we put in place to deliver this. And also there's obviously going to be an information warehouse, and there's going to be an implementing authority. I'll come to that later. I am rushing because there's a lot in this, so apologies. I just want to, sorry, I just skipped forward. How do I go back here? Any idea how I go back, Paul? Page up. Where is page up? Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, so then now we're into the realm of the developer-led projects, okay? And this is where we're talking about communities benefiting from those as well. So we're mandating a community benefit fund, which will deliver based on our planned capacities in this first auction. We'll deliver up to 6 million a year into communities within the vicinity of projects. It's a huge amount of money to be coming into communities, and we do need to put in some sort of apparatus around ensuring that that spend is done properly. So we propose the following characteristics. We will set up a benefits register to make sure this is properly reported, and we will publish a good principles sort of guidebook around how these funds should be administered and so on. We expect the developers to set the funds up, and we will mandate certain promotional requirements so that citizens and communities know that these funds are available to them. We have looked at a variety of models of potential administration of the funds, and we're going to allow a certain amount of opportunity there for different types of models to apply. So for instance, it could be that the developer will run the fund themselves. It could be that they will procure some third party to run it for them. Or it could be that, for instance, the public participation networks might have a role in this, and I've talked to the Department of Community Affairs in that regard. There's all kinds of models, and we want to leave it open, but the critical thing is that all of them will have to include local input. So there'll have to be sort of committees set up that include local representatives and so on. We're going to mandate 2 additional things in this. We're going to mandate that near neighbours will receive benefit payments for reason of where they're living and effectively could be discommoded by these developments. The proposal at the moment is €1,000 annual payment to those who live within 1 kilometre of the facility of the project, and for those who live between 1 and 2 kilometres, €500 per year. That will come out of the fund first, and then after that we will mandate that at least 50% of the remainder will be spent in the community on climate action, energy efficiency, sustainable energy measures. So the idea here is that we try and really tackle climate action down on the ground by the appropriate use of these funds. And obviously we will have monitoring and compliance built in. Now, investment opportunities for citizens and communities in big developer-led projects. This is incredibly tricky, and we've heard already some commentary from previous speakers about, the difficulties of sort of lining this up and making sure that it works and so on. So I suppose we did a lot of research around what might work in Ireland and so on. One of the key issues, in fairness for developers, I think developers are genuinely committed to communities being part of their projects and the benefit fund and so on. We've had no kickback from developers on those proposals at all, like as in the overall proposal. These are specific, but the overall proposal when we announced them last year. Here it's tricky because I suppose from a developer's perspective, if I do a good job on getting 10% or whatever of my company offered out to citizens, it's going to cost me in administration and just complexity around dealing with banks and so on. They're not just dealing with me anymore, they're dealing with citizens or communities. And if another developer down the road doesn't do a good job like that, potentially that developer is able to bid into the auction at a cheaper price and win in the auction. So there's a real issue around leveling the playing pitch for all developers in this. And in the end, what we're proposing is a centralised citizen investment scheme in clean green energy, to be called, the working title is the Renewable Electricity Participation Scheme. It means that all projects will subscribe to this scheme, or else they will demonstrate to us that they can do better. They can make a better offer to communities, or at least match it. And essentially the way this will work is that we're mandating that 5% of the capital value of every project must be lined up through this scheme for citizens to invest in. Now 5% sounds like a small amount of money. It isn't. Based on our projections for the first auction, that figure is going to be somewhere between 40 and 75 million euro. So essentially that amount of money or investment opportunity is going to be made available to ordinary Irish people. There are a bunch of citizen protections built into the draft proposal as we stand. The main one being we propose to guarantee the capital of the scheme, and that will be done through an indemnity fund that all developers will have to fund, so that if there are project failures, that the indemnity fund will ensure that people who invested in those projects will get their capital back from that fund. We have proposed very attractive rates of return that start from 7% and go significantly higher. And the variables that affect how high they go are things like how close you live to the project and how long you're prepared to leave your investment in there. So on 5, 10 and 15-year periods, the rates go higher. The priority access to this scheme is for those in the first instance who live closest, so up to 10 kilometres. Then if that isn't fully subscribed, and realistically it won't be, considering the money I've just mentioned, it'll be opened up to county residents, or 2 counties if the wind farm is close to 2, and so on, and eventually nationwide. It does mean that citizens local to these projects will have the first refusal. If they don't want to invest or can't, that's fine, but they'll have the first refusal. And it does also guarantee that urban dwellers will have an opportunity to invest also when it goes to a nationwide offering, because everybody should have an opportunity to invest in clean green energy, and we believe that this is a genuine vehicle for real climate action by ordinary Irish citizens. How am I on time, Paul? 5 minutes. Okay. Talked about that. Actually fine on time then. 2 challenges that I mentioned somewhere earlier on. Grid connection, so a real issue for communities to date. And we've done a lot of work in this area, because if we don't fix this, then there are no community projects, frankly. So we basically started addressing it in a little line of text that we put into the Energy Act of 2016, which effectively directs the energy regulator, who has control of grid connection policy. We directed them in that legislation to take account of government policy on community energy. And the government policy has then followed and flowed in things like the Energy White Paper, the Climate Action Plan, and now this. We set up a national working group made up of the state bodies, so ourselves, the SEAI, EirGrid, the 2 and ESB networks. Like, we realise this is a problem the state has to fix. So we brought those groups together, and essentially CRU, the regulator, have now gone out to public consultation on a proposed approach to community energy. And that is essentially proposing that there will be allocated grid connections for 15 community projects year on year, and building as necessary. The application can be made to the grid operators without planning permission. Therefore, we reduce the amount of money that has to be invested by communities. There is a commitment to the expedient processing of the application, and also there's a commitment to direct the system operators, so ESB networks, to really work with the communities to make it simple and to clearly outline what the investment requirements will be, and so on and so forth. And in that regard, ESB networks, when they're sitting at that national working group, have committed to putting in place community representatives to deal with community queries on grid. Financing of the scheme, like, I suppose financing of community projects, I've mentioned already things like the feasibility grants and development loans and so on. But obviously there's also an issue trying to get the equity that you need at the outset of projects. We're hoping that the definition, given how broad it is and the need for more than 150 people and so on, We're hoping that will accommodate the financing of these projects to some extent, but also we have had a range of talks with a range of different potential partners with a view to setting up some sort of a fund that can be accessed by communities at the outset for equity finance. And that probably would operate on some sort of a very low rate of return interest payments. I can't announce anything on it in detail yet, but we're certainly working on that in a very meaningful way. How does all of this work? What's the structure that's going to underpin this? We're going to be bringing a proposal to the Minister in the coming weeks to appoint the SEAI as the implementation body for the scheme. They already have huge experience in the Better Energy Community Scheme and the SECs that we've mentioned earlier. And they already have a lot of the supports in place for the SEC network that we're going to need here, like the mentors and so on. But I think in recognition of just how complex this area is, we're also proposing that above SEAI in the mix will be a steering group that will be chaired by ourselves in the department and will include community representatives and trusted intermediary representatives. So with, the plan is that literally this group will have a lot of teeth to actually identify issues that may be emerging as we kick this thing along, and they'll actually be able to help direct SEAI to continually improve the offering to communities. In terms of the community journey, what we're recommending is that, so how do you get a project into this scheme and how do you get your money, a 15-year contract? So set up a sustainable energy community, and within that context or framework you'll have an energy master plan, and you'll hopefully kick off some energy efficiency project to cut your teeth, as it were, because electricity generation is a little bit more complex. So essentially get an energy efficiency project done, and then you can move into generation. And then when you start getting involved in electricity generation, we have trusted intermediaries in place to handhold. We have trusted advisors. These are going to be in place in the coming year so that they're ready. Trusted advisors to give specialist information and guidance. And then we've talked about grid, we've talked about finance. We can do nothing on planning, I'm sorry, but essentially once you put all those together, then you have your loads of community energy projects. Thank you for your time. Apologies for being so brief.
I think everyone in the room who has worked in the community energy sector over the last 10 years recognises the journey that has just, I suppose, been demonstrated this morning in terms of where the department is, where the supports are, and the potential impact of that fairly sizable shift in energy policy that has been demonstrated this morning. So I personally would like to thank Enda on behalf of the community energy sector for all of his hard work that is ongoing, and he has a lot of hard work left, I'm sure he recognises. So we have about 15-20 minutes for questions and answers. I think it's important to say if you have a question, please don't use it for grandstanding. So just say who you are and keep your question relatively brief, and we'll get the speakers to answer. So without further ado, I'll open up to the floor. So we have a question to There's a microphone there behind you, just so everyone can hear. And remember, we have people online as well. So
I'd just like to address a question to the last speaker. You mentioned mentors and expert advisors. Can I ask you, I should say I'm representing Duisburg Sustainable Energy Community. My question is, do you propose that those mentors might look at a sustainable community and advise them on what type of electrical generation system, such as PV or solar or wind or another suggestion, that these advisors might suggest what type of system might be suitable for their
The idea is.
That's for the camera.
Oh, yeah.
Just for the camera.
All right.
Okay.
Just
Yeah,
speak out.
speak out, Chair. Oh yeah. Thanks, Orla.
I think it's on. Hang on, click it back up.
No.
Click it up.
Yeah, the idea is that I suppose under the existing SEC framework, those mentors are also assisting in terms of developing the energy master plan, and there's a grant in place, I suppose largely for consultants to come in and do an energy master plan in consultation with the community. In theory, the energy master plan should identify potential projects or areas where projects might be valuable or may arise. So that would be the starting point, I think, and then thereafter the mentors under this scheme should be able to take those forward then with yourselves.
Question from the front here.
Paul O'Sullivan, Tancredo Community Loan Finance. Just a question again in relation to the proposal for that 5% of the equity on a developer-led renewable energy project be initially offered to local and then our local community groups, say the local, say the Athenry Community Development CLG.
Yeah.
Is that
the
eligible to purchase shares under your proposed scheme, or must it be real persons?
No, and the offer will be open to individuals and to not-for-profit entities. It does include sports clubs and whatever, yeah.
Again, it was on the community investments. I'm trying to remember the slide now. Another question on Germany on the developer side of things, which was we visited Pfaffenhofen or training visit Pfaffenhofen in Bavaria, and they mentioned like that the price is somewhere around 6.5, 6 cents per kilowatt hour, and that very few people had applied there, even though it's supposed mooted as the big opportunity. That there was only maybe one, I think, application in the last year or so there for wind development. So it does seem like there's an issue around the pricing or the over competitiveness of the process. So maybe speak to that.
Yes, that's unfortunately correct. If the price is, the maximum bid price is set at 6.2 cents, and you do the math, there it is, sorry, it wasn't on. And you do the math, and the 6.2 cents just isn't enough, then the calculation doesn't work for you. That's quite accurate. And again, this goes back to this focus on best resources. So up until a few years ago, there was more of an adjustment factor that was used. So you could put up wind turbines in not so windy locations, but the sort of group that wants the prices to come down or the costs also to come down just sort of won the political debate. And the problem that we have is you can also bring costs down for the transition by just not doing it. So the cost impact of wind power is also relative to how much you build, right? So we have quite a dilemma on our hands right now because it's not just about the price, it's also that the volume has fallen out.
Take another question here.
To Tom Brennan, consultant on sustainable energy projects. Just wanted to direct, welcome very much all of the detail that's pending on the RES, and direct a question to Enda in that regard, the supports to communities. I wonder if you can elaborate on the rationale for directing everything through commencing with an SEC, which is obviously a great initiative, but I see it in many ways as being a very different type of business and a very different skill set doing an SEC to actually
Yeah, I suppose we're looking to try and join up the thinking and the approach to all of this in the first instance. I do take the point for sure. SECs maybe don't necessarily need to be the entire sort of basis for it. I suppose what we're suggesting is that there are going to be different models here in terms of delivering a project and different consortium types. And we think that an SEC should be part of the structure of the project. I think that would be good practice anyway, because look, these are indicative of a bunch of people in a community who have essentially put their hand up to say we're interested in energy matters, and we mightn't know exactly where we're going with this, but we've put our hands up because we are. So we see SEC has been central, but not sort of the critical component. In addition, I would say, that's the journey I laid out there is the recommended journey as we see it. Obviously, if you're a Messi or a Ronaldo, you might be able to jump straight into electricity generation. And I think, for instance, like some communities might have a number of engineers, for instance, living in the facility who actually might be able to kick off a project quite easily. So we're not averse to that, but the recommendation, I suppose, is just try and get communities to approach this in a structured way.
I'll take this question here.
Thanks. I'm Marie Brown from NUI Galway. Given that our own research in NUIG and research by the ESRI has suggested that the majority of the Irish public don't want to be involved in owning wind farms or investing in wind farms or share schemes, and our own research actually indicates that offering share schemes leads to worse outcomes in terms of community acceptance than offering no benefits at all. And given the obstacles that the two speakers have faced in their own countries in terms of share schemes and community ownership, are we sure that the 4 pillars that we've outlined are the correct ones in terms of increasing community acceptance and developing large-scale development over the next 10 years or so?
I might ask Craig to answer that first, if I could, just your perspective from Germany before Enda.
Well, I would love to see that data. Maybe you could send me an email if you've published it online. I unfortunately must agree that probably most people don't want to be involved, but what we also know, and I think you kind of hinted at this, it's not so much about my personal involvement. In fact, we have done similar, we in Germany have done similar surveys showing why people like a wind farm, for instance. And usually it's not I benefit personally. The main factor is usually it's good for the community, and I can see that. So whether I'm involved or not, if I understand that my neighbors have benefited, that this guy, his shop didn't close because he's able to do some operations and maintenance on something, I can see that the community's holding together better because of this. The bridge that I showed you, these kind of things. If we can identify that and communicate that, then I think we can get this broad mass, the majority of the public that doesn't want to be bothered with all of this. We can get them to actively welcome these things. That's what I suspect.
Enda, do you want to make a comment?
Part of your question was, am I sure? No. But to be honest, we have done a lot of research as well, and you'd be aware from the high-level design, I suspect that underpinning that in terms of the community provisions was one very comprehensive report that was done by Ricardo, which looked at best practice in other jurisdictions, including both Denmark and Germany. And I suppose in subsequent to that, like all of the engagements that we've had, and particularly with those representing the community sector, many of them in this room, they've all been crying out for this kind of support structure. And they have a genuine belief that this will kick off. I think in terms of the investment, I take the point that you've done good research in that area, and it doesn't look like from that research that there is an appetite. That's why we've tried to put in place a very simple citizen investment in good, clean, green energy vehicle, where all of the projects are in this scheme from the outset, and where we can actually do some proper marketing and promotion of it, and the developers will also be central to that. So I think if you put a simple proposition to the Irish people, where it's de-risked as much as possible, and we have done that, then I think there will be an appetite personally.
Sarah Kendra from the Marai Centre for Marine and Renewable Energy at University College Cork. So my colleague here and I are working on the Airwind project, looking at the development of offshore wind specifically for Ireland. And one aspect of our work is looking at different benefit sharing mechanisms and community participation in offshore wind. And I suppose some of the issues that we've come up against are that some of these projects can be located very far offshore. So the question of kind of who is the community, especially for some of the floating wind projects, and then the scale of investment, given the scale of investment required, how do you get communities to participate in these types of projects? So I suppose my question, one for Enda, is what could community participation in offshore wind look like for Ireland? And then maybe could Louise or Craig comment on the experiences in Germany or Denmark, and are there any lessons that we can learn in Ireland around that?
Yeah, so on offshore, you're right, there'll have to be tweaking to the models for that, and I suppose whilst offshore projects can bid into this first option, it's probably more realistic to think that they'll benefit from the second option, which has been flagged for 2021. We do need to look at the communities, because obviously you don't have this radius and so on, but you do have close proximity features. But also I think the sort of apparatus that we're putting in place in terms of extending offerings to nationwide citizens, I think that kind of thing will help us to brush up in terms of offshore. I mean, if all the citizens of Ireland have the opportunity to ultimately invest in an offshore project, I think no matter what its scale, there is a real opportunity that the full 5% that we're proposing at the moment will be taken up. But it will be significant amounts of money, and I think in order for citizens to put their hands in their pockets to invest, I think it is all about this concept of trust in the scheme. So we're really hoping that we can get this scheme, sorted and so on. It's gone out, or it's going out in the public consultation, and we have to see what feedback we get. And there are some legal and government approvals and so on that needs to be required. But fingers crossed.
Louise or Craig?
I can try. I don't know if we have any example of offshore, but we have some examples of nearshore wind turbines where they have made these funds that I was talking about in Vilsene. So that some of the projects are actually owned by a local fund that can feed into the local society. That could be to make a new sports facilitation or anything, and that way they actually raise a lot of public support through that. So that's one example. They've done that. I think it's in Samsø in Denmark. They have done that a lot. Anaerobic.
Okay, I'll take a question down here.
Yeah. I've got a question for Enda about the 5% investment scheme for the developer-led projects.
You might just say where you're.
My name is Brian Barron, and I'm with Trim SEC. I was wondering if those shares would have voting power. Would they be giving control to the local people that will be benefiting as well?
Yeah, good question. I think, again, we looked at this in serious detail, and I think maybe coming back to other questions here and the appetite for citizens to invest in these schemes or in renewable energy in general. No, the proposal is that it's, from the point of view of the investor, it's essentially a revenue share model, and from the point of view of the developer, it's a debt model. That's the way it sort of pans out. It's not an equity share because there's significant risk attached to taking, an equity stake in a project, and we don't think that there's an appetite for that kind of risk. So we've tried to de-risk it, and in that regard, it's a revenue model with baseline returns indicated, but subject to revenues generating from the project.
Yeah. Sorry, my name is JP Prendergast. I'm from the Kilmarnock Western District Energy Co-op. We're part of the Community Power Group as well. I'd just like to thank Enda for all the hard work he's done, because he's under a lot of pressure. And I know it's been a tough journey and probably a long way to go yet, but it's definitely a great announcement today. I think it was very positive. Just a small poking question there for you, and do you have a time frame maybe on the progress of this first auction, when you think this may be happening, or on that?
Yeah, there would have to be a sting in the tail, JP. Yeah, we've committed to the auction taking place in June of next year. Yeah, so like because auctions are new for Ireland, like they're relatively new in the last half decade or so across the world, but this is our first one. So there has been a huge amount of planning and so on required, and we've started now in terms of engagements with particularly industry. We've had 2 sessions with industry already where we've outlined the approach to the auctions. We will do one of those as well with communities, probably around February, I suspect. There aren't that many community projects that are eligible for the first auction, which is June next year. That's just because of the eligibility criteria require that you have grid access, you have a grid connection, and you have planning. And those are there for good reasons, and we're not changing that. But we still expect that there'll be at least a few community projects that are in that space, and we'll be trying to get those through the auction process. I mean, when you think of the pain we've experienced on state aid, the idea of us not delivering community projects through the scheme, because of inaction or a lack of help, it just doesn't wash. So.
Okay, I have 2 more questions.
John Kinney from College Engineering Systems. Just a quick question. I'm just wondering about the impact of the Renewable Electricity Scheme, particularly on projects that might be more integrated, so more like biomethane, road transport fuels, energy efficiency. This particular scheme will just focus on the electricity side, and I wonder, will that mean that there'll be fewer integrated projects as a result? People will focus on electricity where the incentives are.
I think no comment at this point, on the basis that really the whole focus of my division in the department has been to get the electricity scheme through. So I think in time we will certainly be looking at other initiatives and so on, but this has been an all hands on deck initiative.
Gavin Forkin from Plan Energy. Thanks very much to the presenters. I'm interested, and if you wouldn't mind outlining something about the time frame for these trusted intermediaries. If they're to take the energy master plans from communities on into realistic projects, when is that group supposed to be up and running?
Yeah, I suppose first of all we have to secure the Minister's approval to appoint SCAI to be the implementing body for communities in this scheme, because then SCAI will set about procuring those type of services and so on. One of the reasons we haven't appointed the SCAI to date is just the complexity around the citizen investment scheme piece, this big clean green scheme I've talked about. We just need to be certain of what the precise requirements for SCAI are in that regard. So we would have appointed them sooner, subject to Minister's approval. Once we get them in place, we will start building the framework. I mean, in essence, we just need to start off with one trusted intermediary and one provider of legal services, one of financial, and so on. So it will start off quite small. We have secured a funding line from the Department of Public Expenditure for this, and we've put in for an allocation of human resources as well to deliver this. So again, you know, we would hope to be successful in that regard. But it kicks off slowly. It kicks off on a small basis from early next year. Just on the energy master plan. I mean, the energy master plan under the SEC program kind of progresses as normal, and as I say, we're hoping that that plan will identify potential projects that can then be looked at.
I'll take a final question from John.
John Fogarty from Tipperary and Community Power. I think to add to what JP has already said, I'd like to congratulate Enda, because we're all very aware of the amount of sweat and work that went into producing this. Sort of in one stroke, he's eliminated the biggest part of the financial block by including our community in the first place and ring fencing a section for community. I think from the outset we all knew that the finance, grid and planning were the three big obstacles, and finance has been largely addressed here. I think in your presentation, Enda, you outlined in a couple of places that one of the barriers still is grid connection, and I'm not too sure, maybe a lot of people may not be aware that if they decided to build a renewable energy project tomorrow, it would probably take them about 7 years to get connected to the grid, the way things are at the moment, which is very hard to keep the community group active in that length of time. So I think I see that maybe the CRU, the regulator, and networks are trying to do something to address this. And I see that you mentioned that they will connect 15 projects per annum, but 15 projects per annum could be 200 kilowatts. So if in the first option you're given a commitment to say 20 megawatts, well then networks needs to be in tandem and connect 20 megawatts with the first option. Also, likewise the second and third option. So this needs a huge commitment from the regulator and the networks to make this work. And I sincerely hope that that appetite is there. And so thanks once again.
Thanks, John. You're right. I mean, the grid is critical, and I do think what I've referenced today is game-changing. I think getting the regulator and the system operators, ESB networks and so on, into the room and trying to thrash this out has led to a sea change already in thinking and approach. And I think that has significantly kicked off in that consultation that I mentioned around the 15 connections. I have no doubt in my mind at this point that ESB networks are genuinely committed to delivering on community energy. And I think given that the CRU have gone out to public consultation, I think if you understand the way they work, they're going out with essentially what are proposed decisions. So I fully expect this to be confirmed as official connection policy in probably quarter 2 of next year. So I think it can be delivered on January.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And thank you very much to our speakers. There's tea and coffee outside and a little snack. We have an hour session on biogas, so have a cup of coffee, bring it back in, and then we'll have our biogas session.
Yes, sir. Just to tell you, the master plan, yeah?
The second session this morning. I know it's hard to all be seated after quite an interesting change in energy policy in Ireland. So the second part of the session this morning is going to focus on biogas and particular communities and how communities engage in biogas. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, electricity is one part of the energy transition, but there are some other very important ones like heat and transport, which make up about 80% of our primary energy usage. So this afternoon session is going to focus on a couple of different things, but really looking about the opportunity of biogas in the future. So we're going to start with Ian Kilgallen, who's Business Development and Innovation Manager with Gas Networks Ireland. And Ian has been working really to support the development of biogas as a key tool to decarbonise our I suppose, gas vector, and particularly around transport. And one really interesting thing that, just to link the session this morning, the smart energy systems that was mentioned from Aalborg. Aalborg believe or not believe, but a lot of their sums for different European countries would say that the HGV fleet in most countries will be decarbonised easiest through the use of biogas, and particularly where biogas takes carbon emissions that would have otherwise been emitted to the atmosphere. So I will invite Ian up to the panel to give a little bit of a talk on the opportunity of biogas in Ireland.
Thanks very much, Paul. So just as a quick introduction, obviously we're Gas Networks Ireland, so we're the network operator, both the transmission and distribution network operator in Ireland. Now, my topic is mostly around renewable gas, anaerobic digestion, biomethane. We ourselves are specialising in the agri area, so we're not experts in the commercial waste sector. So there will be other advisors that would be better suited to direct you in that particular focus. But in the agri space, obviously renewable gas, biomethane is we believe, a kind of a circular economy, natural fit into the agricultural community. So you're looking at AD, and if people aren't familiar with AD, the principle is that you use an oxygen-free environment, these digester tanks, to break down organic matter into two primary constituents, a biofertilizer and renewable gas, biomethane. So it's a raw biogas that's produced, but to make biomethane, there's a further purification step. But indeed, even with the biofertilizer, raw digestate is the product produced, but the standard design really of most AD biomethane plants includes at least minimum processing in digestate as well. So it's essentially taking animal slurry waste. It's all about waste and residues primarily. Agriculture fundamentally tied to the food and beverage industry, so it's waste and residues from the food manufacturing sector as well. So agri includes all materials up to and including the supermarket shelf, if you appreciate. Everything from the supermarket shelf and post is commercial waste. From a licensing point of view, however, if you're taking in animal byproducts and indeed food waste from up to supermarket shelf, you may need an EPA license, and in most cases you would. So to be able to charge a gate fee at all will require an EPA license, even though you're in the agri space. But in all cases, all AD plants will be required to be licensed and approved by the Department of Agriculture, irregardless of whether you're commercial waste or agri-related. So the circular economy piece is central to the whole model. So you're producing a gas that goes to the gas grid and ultimately back to the customer. Many of those customers will actually be food industry companies currently typically dominantly running on gas. Then obviously the biofertilizer is displacing chemical fertilizer, but also it's an indigenous source of fertilizer as well. We import all of our chemical fertilizers here in Ireland. We also import about 40% of our natural gas. So it's indigenous sources for both of those, but there are other byproducts that will develop. Just in terms of where we are as a country, we're very much the last one coming to this particular sector. Biomethane is well and truly established across Europe. As you can see in this particular map, we're not even on the map. We've only 2 biomethane facilities to date in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, and we may only have another 1 or 2 next year, for instance. So the pipeline of projects will see a significant growth from 2021 onwards. But in terms of, I suppose, the advantage of coming late means that we can adapt and learn from what all of our European colleagues have done. That is the only advantage, I might say. Now, we are essentially the gas network company. We're responsible also for the technical standards for all things in the gas industry. So we have been very proactive in working with our European colleagues, and at this stage we've ruled in and ruled out a lot of technologies that are there. Like there's 11,000 biogas facilities in Germany, for instance, but the AD tank solutions and the feedstock solutions really aren't at all compatible for the Irish market. So we're really adapting French and Italian technologies primarily, and also some Swedish technology and some Danish as well for that matter. So when you see our technical standards, you don't see much from the German side on the AD tanks and the feedstock end of things, but you do see it on the gas purification, for instance. So it's not a one size fits all, it's kind of taking the best of what's out there and adapting ideally to the Irish market. So in supporting the development of the industry here in Ireland, we have joined forces together with 5 other gas network utilities similar to ourselves, responsible for implementing technical standards for all things gas related, including renewable gas. So this group of 6 is called GD4S, Gas Distributors for Sustainability. All 6 of us have made a full commitment to completely decarbonise our gas networks by 2050. And as part of that commitment, each of these 6 entities, including ourselves, had to issue a vision plan as to how we can achieve that total decarbonisation by 2050. Obviously 2050 is a long time away from now, so if you can appreciate, this is a vision, and the figures and percentages probably aren't right. I can guarantee I won't be around in 2050 to argue as to what it's likely to be, but the principle is that renewable gas would dominate. So biomethane sources in Ireland would by far be the most significant, especially for the next 20 years. We are doing a lot of work on hydrogen as well, and also on carbon capture and storage. So they're the 3 primary technologies. All are more complicated than might first be seen. Hydrogen is a very complex story, and it's not as simple. It's not just about replacing one gas with another. It has multiple applications and multiple ways it can be integrated. But as I say, everything we're doing now, especially for the next 10 to 15 years, would be really biomethane. And other than innovation and demonstration projects, you won't really see much in the hydrogen and CCS spaces. So just into renewable gas and how people can deal with us and engage with us in terms of projects. So an AD facility, an agri-AD facility, obviously is going to be rural based in the farming community. The AD itself needs to be located at or adjacent to a source of slurry, ideally, or other forms of waste, and I'll go into the waste or the feedstock streams. So you're looking at a facility that would be co-located, say, with a pig farm, with a beef finisher units. In the case of the dairy sector, there isn't really the dairy sector farm size, with a few minor exceptions, generally speaking, wouldn't have enough animal slurry to feed an AD of this size. So you're looking at a cluster of 4 or 5 or even 6 dairy farmers coming together to supply slurry feedstock into a single AD unit. In terms of scale of investment, you're looking at minimum size at this stage is about €5 million for an AD facility. Given that based on the projects we're engaged with at the moment, we would see typically an average size of about 11 farmers together on a single project. We have some projects that have as many as 32, so it's not as I say, it's not going to be a case of a single farmer in most cases doing this on their own. It's a multiple project, but obviously a significant investment. The gas purification technology is about €1 million in itself, and what we refer to as the network entry facility. So if you imagine the same thing with renewable electricity, you need a transformer and a direct line into the electricity network. Same infrastructure, obviously for gaseous fuels in our case. It's about €500,000 investment for a direct injection. I should say that the €5 million investment at the digester would include all of the costs associated with the digestate processing as well, if you know what I mean. But all in, you're looking at a significant investment for projects, and this is probably about the minimum. Now, equally, I would say we're not getting many projects that are double the size or anything like that, so it's probably a representative example of kind of typical costs as well. In terms of connecting into the gas grid, depending on how far the project is from the gas network, it could be 100 metres, it could be 10 kilometres. And if it's in that range, you're looking at a cost between €100,000 to €1 million for a connection. And it's largely down to distance from the network and where the network is most optimally suited to connect directly into. Under our connection policy, we essentially can cover 70% of that cost, so the cost to the developer is 30% of that number, if you appreciate. In terms of developments then, again, agri-focused here, there's a range of specific feedstocks that are already accepted and approved. It's not to say that we're not open to other feedstock scenarios. We obviously would work with developers to see if they've got other innovative solutions or sources, and we have a few projects of interest in that area. We would bring them through a process of validation with our academic colleagues, and also there are some commercial laboratories that can assist in that space already established in Ireland. So as you can see, you have a range of different feedstocks. You've also classification, which is very important. The waste classification applies to some of these feedstocks, not all. And the minimum requirement for an AD plant needs both. And you need, as in primarily to be focused on waste, you need a minimum quantity of about 40% waste-oriented materials. And that's not a definitive, it's just an initial guideline. And obviously you can go up to 60%, again, depending on the full sustainability life cycle, but you can go up to 60% on some types of feedstocks, including grass silage or rotation crops from tillage and things like that. So just in terms of sustainability criteria then, to understand the simple principles, the Renewable Energy Directive obliges minimum targets, so there isn't a scenario that you could build an agri-based AD facility in Ireland on an entirely energy crop basis. The regulations under the Renewable Energy Directive, Phase 2, which implement in 2021, they're mandatory. You simply can't work around it. So you need to meet the minimum greenhouse gas savings for every project. So it's a calculation based on the feedstock mix, like you had here, but also the design of the facility, the efficiency of that facility, and there's a pre-qualification process on that as well. So in working with us, we need to understand the feedstock mix, we need to understand the basics of the design, and we would work with a lot of collaborative partners on, and again, tying back to the minimum standards we're bringing in from other European countries as well. So there's a lot of guideline material, but I'd say it's a combination of feedstock, design, and efficiency. Also the land bank management and the means by which digested fertilizer would be spread also feed into the equation. So the purpose of that essentially, and if you can see, this is biomethane is a combustible fuel, it's a combustion fuel, it's used in heat transport or electricity production. The objectives in the directive is that the carbon footprint of the biomethane must be at a minimum target for 2021, and indeed the target will be even lower again from 2026 onwards. Now the agri mix of slurry and grass, as you say, 60-40 split, can do that as long as the design is right, and again as long as there's a displacement of chemical fertilizer, minimum 65% displacement, and typically more than 80% displacement of chemical fertilizer. And there are other measures in there, but actually can be comfortably met on that mix, and actually if anything can be quite significantly exceeded. A good design would actually be delivering a carbon negative solution, and carbon will have value in the future, and we're putting in place an accreditation scheme. The principle of the calculation methodology is outlined here, it's in the directive. It seems complicated, but it's actually relatively straightforward. The model we're implementing, and we've done so with the best advisors from Germany and France, the bodies that essentially wrote this particular section of the Renewable Energy Directive, we've directly contracted them to develop a tool that we can implement here in Ireland. So that kind of outlines, look at, you've got this carbon sequestering benefits, you've the ability to save more carbon in the process or CO2 than you're generating. So ultimately you're delivering a carbon negative solution. And as I say, the new IPCC processes are also implementing this, which give significant value to grassland use as well. In particular, grassland is recognised as a significant carbon sink. So this green gas certification scheme will be implemented. We're partnered and we've licensed the scheme already, and it's actually will be fully implemented by January. So just to give another outline, the Renewable Gas Forum Ireland have actually published a very detailed business case for government. The full report is about 250 pages long. The exact summary is on their website. So it highlights a significant economic benefit to the agri sector to develop AD facilities. And the core principle, and some of the highlight figures within this, the wider economic benefits associated with an AD facility. You're talking about a significant amount of jobs. AD facilities employ a lot of people. You're securing employment from the farming community that are supplying feedstock to the AD plant. You've got biofertilizer being produced displacing chemical fertilizer. You're obviously producing biomethane displacing natural gas. So lots of these significant benefits. So as a whole, a very detailed assessment was done under this study that determined that the the wider economic benefits demonstrate that for every euro spent, there's a euro and 26 return to the exchequer. So it is a net positive business case. And as I said, there's other key elements within the report, and I'd recommend you take a look at that. So this just gives you a brief outline of some of those key benefits. The indigenous nature is quite important. Displacement of imports is very, very significant. And as I say, displacement of CO2, industrial CO2 is another example that will help the business case but actually demonstrate overall positivity. In terms of market for biomethane, heat is the predominant market at the moment. And indeed, the studies from across Europe show that in terms of decarbonising industrial heat and processing heat in particular, there really isn't a direct competitor. It's the most cost-effective solution for that space. Transport then, actually we're doing quite a lot of work, specifically as Paul was describing the heavy goods vehicle market. There really isn't another competitive alternative in HGV transport, and obviously again the indigenous nature is quite important. So just to give an outline of current initiatives, so where we're at, in bringing in European standards and proving that they work in an Irish market. One of the first projects I'd point to is the Causeway project. This was a €19 million project. It's still running. The purpose of this project was to roll out an initial infrastructure of 14 CNG stations, that's compressed natural gas stations for heavy goods vehicles. So we're well advanced in that at this stage. We've got 3 up and running, and we're commissioning another 2 in the next month. Also part of this project was the first biomethane grid injection project, which is located in Cush, County Kildare. So this facility is taking gas from the green generation facility in Nerney, County Kildare. It's about 12 kilometres away from the actual injection point. In this case, we're demonstrating here not actually a direct injection, but what we refer to as a virtual pipeline connection. So in essence, the gas is produced at the Nerney site. It's purified to natural gas spec as biomethane. It's compressed into these trailer units. This 20-foot box unit you're seeing essentially is a mobile storage unit, and those trailer units are transported to Cush and injected into the network there. So we see 2 models for the Irish market accordingly, the direct injection and this kind of virtual pipeline mobile solution as well. So the first one we've implemented happens to be the more difficult, but actually it's proven it works very, very efficiently. So just another project, that's Project Raise, is an industrial version of what we've got in Cush. Project Raise is a €28 million project between ourselves and the Climate Action Fund. We're in planning permission at the moment. We should have hopefully that approved by January. And in essence, this facility will support 20 remote agri-based AD plants feeding into the network. These plants will be located within a 50-kilometre radius of the injection point, or roughly speaking. The other aspect parallel to that project is the Agri-AD project, which is led by the dairy cooperative movement. There are 3 companies leading that, and we're supporting them. They're putting in place a €35 million fund to fund the first phase of AD plants. There'll be about 5 or 6 AD plants fully funded out of that initial scheme. And within that as well, there's a very specific agenda to develop, I suppose, a standardisation model around the business solution as well. It's working very collaboratively with the Irish Cooperative Society, and I suppose it's adopting the ICOS model rather than trying to develop something from scratch. And as I said, this just gives you a flavour of the kind of size and scale of developments. The 20 gigawatt hours per annum is the kind of reference we would use to the minimum size for one of these facilities supporting that site. It would be drawing in feedstock within a 10-kilometre radius, each of these plants, and would involve, roughly speaking, about 4 to 5% of the farmers within each 10-kilometre radius. So it's an all-inclusive, and as I say, the average number of farmers involved varies from 12 up to 30. And if anyone wants to, as I say, make a direct engagement with ourselves, currently we have 86 projects pre-approved for direct injection, plus the remote projects through the Mitchellstown project, and we've another one actually feeding that we're looking to support with the Cush project. So anyone who's looking at this area should make an inquiry into our email address here. One of our people will be in touch with you, and we can bring you through the process. I should point out, it's a minimum 4-year process from beginning to commissioning. So, as I say, it's a journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ian. I am conscious we're running a little bit behind schedule, so I'm being a little bit ruthless on the timing. So next up is Xavier Dubisson, who is a long-time supporter of sustainable energy in Ireland. And I suppose Xavier works as a mentor, runs a sustainable energy consultancy out of West Cork. And I guess a lot of the people in the room know all about Xavier. So a really interesting project is looking at the Dingle Peninsula and the potential of anaerobic digestion feedstocks there. So I'm really curious to hear all about it. So.
Great. Now I'm under pressure with time. I don't know. I'm usually quite, I take my time and I go for my slides. I'm not sure how I'll manage this, but I'm lucky that Ian was before me and I think gave a lot of the background information that's necessary to kind of understand what I'm saying. Never mind the accent. We'll try and keep myself calm and steady to make sure you understand what I'm saying. But really, we've been commissioned by the Dingle Hub, a sustainable energy community based in Dingle, obviously, to look at the feasibility of anaerobic digestion at community level in Dingle. We've started the work, let's say earlier this summer, and we're pretty much on target, and we hope to finish the project in February, March of next year. The project has been funded by Gas Network Ireland, thank you very much, Ian, and the DECO project via Udoras na Gaeltacht. So that's for an introduction. You have heard and seen what AD is about, so I will skip that slide if you don't mind. I suppose what's worth emphasizing is that AD is the integrated energy system by excellence, in that the fuel can be used for heat transport and electricity generation. It fits very well within the circular economy of organic waste management, and it's also very local, and it can serve local energy needs as well. And very importantly for the group in Dingle, it is agricultural based, and therefore there's a lot of potentials to address a lot of the challenges within the agricultural sector. So let's get into the subject matter in itself. The first step we did, so typically when we get involved in that kind of project, we start with a holistic approach. Where is the energy demand? How much is used for what, and how much does it cost? Then let's look at the resources available within a territory rather than zooming straight into a potential project at a given location. And that's what we started with. Let's look at what feedstocks are available within the peninsula that can be used for anaerobic digestion. In that process of investigation, we started our engagement process with the local community and farmers in particular, who were the key stakeholders when it comes to the feedstocks. And we conducted a limited number of surveys among farmers in the area to understand the potential, but also their attitudes towards anaerobic digestion. We had the first stakeholder workshop in May, and we also presented and participated to the Farmers Forum in Dingle earlier this autumn. The key learnings from that engagement and consultation processes are, you'll be familiar with those thematics. There's a real issue with income in farming, and especially around beef farming. And there is another issue, which is the age profile of the farming community. A lot of them are at retirement age, really kind of are stuck, would love to take time off and enjoy their golden years, and that's not easy. At the other end of the scale of the age profile, young people are leaving the community, and there's a brain drain issue going on there. There's obviously a real concern around climate action and really a commitment to address it, and also the kind of high dependency of the local economy on tourism, which makes it quite vulnerable in terms of changes, for example, in the price of oil, and related to, you need to bring all these people to Dingle to get the economy going. So there are kind of challenges there. And on the other hand, the key things that we were told should be key principles in devising that, or developing the vision and the kind of projects that would benefit the local economy. Well, obviously, it needs to maximize the economic benefits should be maximized for the local community. And the community ownership model that's been well discussed today, and it's very encouraging to see that the policy framework is going in that direction, should be central to the kind of project model, the business model that we need to look at. And that the biogas is produced locally using local resources for local energy needs, as opposed to being exported for grid injection somewhere else, for example. And that it participates to circular economy, including around tourism, and drives innovation locally. Again, bringing younger people back to the locality, and give them stuck in interesting projects. So in terms of the numbers and the potential for the feedstock, we primarily looked at silage, grass silage. We then looked at slurry from cattle, and we also looked at different ranges of organic waste, food waste, food industry waste, wastewater treatment waste, etc. And we took different assumptions as to where the potential might lie, and we looked at, in terms of silage, increasing the production of silage from the current level of, let's say, anything between 5 and 8 tons of dry matter per hectare, up to 10 tons per dry matter per hectare. So that's around improvement in grass management and fertilization, etc. Also, that's an element of the existing permanent pasture can be turned to silage production, again, by improving the land and grass management, and also considering the challenges that are in the bee farming sector, that farm enterprise would move from dry cattle to producing silage for biogas generation. And we took a broad assumption of 30% of the permanent pasture moving towards that silage production for biogas. As I said, we looked at a number of other feedstocks, and the graph on the right gives you a snapshot of what's there. And the numbers themselves might not say much, but what's very interesting is that the food wastes, etc., are quite minor, and slurry is also very minor compared to the potential for grass silage. So inevitably, if you want to do anything of scale, silage will have to be part of the picture, and that brings in issues around cost and logistics, etc. But it's also a very good feedstock for anaerobic digestion. The other element you can't see it here, but what was interesting is that that column, that amount of potential feedstock in energy terms, is very similar to what the overall energy consumption is within the peninsula. Obviously, there's conversion efficiencies, etc., but considering biogas essentially can meet a significant amount of the local energy demand. So then the next step was to look at the different pathways. So Ian gave you a very good illustration of what their thinking is around how do you produce the gas, how do you convert into something that can be burnt effectively to either produce electricity, heat, or transport. And the big focus is on compressed biomethane for, let's say, transport purposes or grid injection. So we looked at the full picture, the full spectrum, and we broke down this kind of overall schematic into pieces that are relevant to what could happen there. And from my feeling from Ian's presentation is that it's highly complex. There's a lot of things to consider along the value chain. There's a lot of constraints, etc. And you think it's complex and difficult to make projects work at the kind of scale it's thinking about. So imagine the challenge when you reduce it by 2 or 3 in terms of not having those economies of scale, and also considering that there is no grid injection point anywhere near the peninsula. And looking at all those challenges, our job is to try and find a breakthrough in all that. And it's not easy, but when it's not easy, it gets the creative juices going. And we think, slowly but surely we'll find something. And just to illustrate where we are now, we're looking at, let's say, relatively small scale using farm-based products. So again, silage and slurry. And at the end of the scale, using food waste, which brings in, or let's say organic waste, which require pasteurization. There's a fairly heavy regulatory environment to do that. And so you're kind of looking at different technologies and different scale as well. And within that, we're looking at producing, a relatively standard type of model where you produce biogas that's used in a combined heat and power engine, produce electricity and heat. Or you upgrade the biogas to compressed biomethane. which can be exported either for grid injection or used locally in, let's say, boilers or CHP units in, for example, the local hotel. And then the other one is where, in addition to, let's say, the biogas to biomethane plant, you have your own CHP. The process requires a lot of heat and electricity, and therefore it makes sense to use some of the biogas to produce that energy locally. So that's kind of the range of options we looked at, and we started looking at the economics of it all, looking at the life cycle costs and do kind of profit and loss or a balance sheet for the systems. And that's where we're at now, pretty much. We're looking at different pathways, and I'm trying to identify what will work. If you look at the bottom line here, the operation balance is, in most cases, very difficult. It's negative, basically, and I would argue at this stage we're refining that analysis and finding more and more information. In terms of costs, for example, we're getting a better understanding of the constraints of the animal byproduct regulation in terms of treatments, in terms of costs that go with that. And we're finding that is actually quite let's say, a rosy picture of what it could be. So we're now trying to say, okay, how do we find other revenue streams that can come from this type of project, considering the circular economy elements that we've discussed before. And within that, we feel that, for example, CO2 recovery for the process of production of biomethane, which would now allow separating the CO2 and liquefying it as a byproduct, that's very, very valuable for example, the food industry, growing greenhouses, for example, refrigeration installation, the food and beverage industry, so the houses all are significant users of CO2, and that can be an interesting extra revenue stream for the project. The other thing we're looking at is, for example, using biochar, so using, let's say, the solid fraction of the digesters outside, that comes out of the plant, and treating that through pyrolysis. And turning in that, let's say, organic matter into biochar, which has a lot of very interesting uses in terms of carbon sequestration, first of all, but also as really useful benefits for animal husbandry, and is a fantastic soil amendment sources as well. So, that has inevitably a value. There isn't really a market yet in Ireland for this, but that will come in time. So we need to think through, how do we develop a project and plan for the project in a way that will allow this to happen down the road when the market becomes available, or it can be piloted in Lingle. The other piece is the local ownership. Like, finance is a big issue. These are, multi-million projects, and the cost of finance has a big bearing on the economics of the project. So obviously, grants and other incentives of that nature will be much welcome and necessary for this kind of project, but there's other models rather than your money sitting in a savings account and doing very little. This is an opportunity to invest in your local community and improve your return on investment from your placement. And so we're thinking around the lines of creating a Dingle Energy Bond for local shareholders with backing by larger guarantors. And I think something that is along the lines of what you're thinking for the RESS, etc. And so we're bringing that into the picture and seeing, can that help bridge the gap, as mentioned before. I should mention, within that kind of holistic approach, we're conducting a spatial analysis for the let's say, biogas within the area, trying to understand what are the suitable locations for projects, so that down the road we can start engaging the community to understand with them and develop the potential projects at specific locations and engage with them on that front. So Sarah Kandras, you've heard her asking question earlier, is our partner on the project, and she's the GIS expert that's developed the spatial multi-criteria analysis, and she's looked at all the key parameters and constraints and factors that need to be considered to identify where is it possible to install such a system. And that's the result of our analysis. I won't go into the detail, but that's very powerful in starting to understand where do we need to go, where is the energy demand, for example, where are the no-go areas in terms of proximity to urban areas or special areas of conservation, and all these factors that need to be considered. Instead of talking hypothetically as a potential project somewhere, this makes this much more real and enables us to really zoom in on specific areas and identify where the constraints are and what kind of locations would provide maximal benefits for the project and the local community. So we're kind of moving on with the study, and we're looking at the next steps, and we're kind of zooming on what are the best path, what's the best pathway, and elaborating on that. And we're in the process of doing a preliminary design for the plant and getting costings, and so we can refine our life cycle cost analysis, and you know, we will be going through pretty much finishing that in the next few weeks. And the next step will be to look at the community ownership model and to develop a roadmap for developing this kind of project within Legal. So sorry, this is a bit rushed, but I think it gives you a flavor. Come back to us. And Deirdre from the Dingle Hub, who's here today, if you want to find out more. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Xavier. It's really good to see a practical, rural-based digestion feasibility study coming to the fore, and hopefully we'll see that built in the next couple of years. The next speaker, or the last speaker of the day, is Richard O'Shea, Dr. Richard O'Shea from the Marai Centre in UCC. And he has been doing his research on renewable gas and the potential of the renewable gas in Ireland. So he's going to look at the future energy system and the future opportunity for renewable gas in Ireland.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard O'Shea. I'm a postdoctoral researcher with the Marai Centre, which is an SFI Centre for Energy, Climate and Marine. And today I'm going to give a brief overview about the integration of renewable gas into future energy systems. A lot of it will have been covered by Ian and Xavier previously, so hopefully we'll clip along through it nicely. The motivations for Marai, as I outlined, are the energy transition, moving from fossil linear-based energy systems to circular renewable energy systems, climate action, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and the blue economy, valorising and realising the resource associated with the ocean that surrounds this island. So looking at energy in Ireland, in 2018 this is total final energy consumption in Ireland, and kind of the big takeaway message is it's not just electricity. 80% of it is not electricity. A large chunk, totally dominated by fossil fuels, is the transport sector. An equally large chunk, dominated by fossil fuels, is the heating sector. So we are making incredible strides in decarbonising our electricity system, and that will play a role in heat and transport through the electrification of transport and heat. But there remains to be other areas within those sectors that will be difficult to decarbonise using renewable electricity. Taking a bit of a deeper look, the large blue wedge down here is transport, and that's totally dominated by oil. Looking at the residential and industrial areas, again, they're predominantly dominated by oil, gas and electricity. So we need to source more renewable energy in each of these sectors in Ireland. On a global scale, this is an example of where we get our renewable energy from. So in 2017, half of the global production of renewable energy came from modern bioenergy. So modern bioenergy would be liquid biofuels used in transportation, gaseous biofuels, either used in the production of heat or as a transport fuel, or the combustion of solid biomass in either combined heat power plants or district heating systems. Looking at the sectors where bioenergy would be used, it's predominantly in the production of heat and in transportation. Going forward, the International Energy Agency estimate that we need 145 exajoules of bioenergy, with a focus of 30 exajoules in transportation and about 2 to 3 exajoules of this from renewable gas. So what is renewable gas? Well, essentially it can be produced from any sort of biodegradable material, beach cast seaweed, animal slurry, grass silage, food waste, anything that can rot. You can put it into an anaerobic digester that was touched on previously, and it produces biogas, a combination of methane and CO2. You can remove the CO2 in an upgrading process, and then use the resulting biomethane anywhere you use natural gas today as a source of heat in an industrial, residential area, or as a transport fuel, predominantly in heavy goods vehicles. Moving into the future, you can also produce biogas from microalgae, pond scum. So essentially you can grow microalgae using the liquid effluent from a digester. You can also use some of the CO2 from your upgrading system to grow your microalgae. That microalgae can either be turned straight into biogas in a digester, or in a far more favourable situation, you can extract a high value product from the microalgae in a biorefinery, like omega-3 fatty acids. That provides the economic backbone of your system, and then your residues can be used in an anaerobic digester. You can also produce renewable gas from solid woody biomass, either through gasification or pyrolysis for the production of syngas. And that syngas can then be converted into biomethane, again to be used wherever you can use natural gas, provided it meets great quality specifications. And the final bit is actually renewable electricity. So I'll touch on this later, but you can convert electricity into hydrogen. Hydrogen can burn. You can use it in a fuel cell. However, in Ireland, we don't have a hydrogen infrastructure. We can't really move hydrogen through our gas network, or certain portions of the gas network. What we can move is methane. So you can combine that hydrogen with carbon dioxide and produce renewable methane. That can again be used wherever you can use natural gas. So it's a way of converting potentially wasted renewable electricity from variable renewable generators into methane gas that can be used in areas where electricity finds it difficult to decarbonise. Again, one of the policy drivers for this is the Renewable Energy Directive, Mark II, and it sets out sustainability criteria for use of renewable gases or biofuels or bioenergy sources in transportation and heat. We didn't look at electricity in this study because in Ireland most of the electricity renewably will be sourced from wind. Looking at the hurdle you have to overcome in order to be classified as a renewable or sustainable fuel, it's about an 80% greenhouse gas saving for heat and a 65% greenhouse gas saving for transport, which means that it might be easier to use renewable gas as a renewable transport fuel rather than burning it in industry. It might be easier. Looking at why renewable gas can be sustainable and looking at how it can produce carbon negative fuels is predominantly around treating slurry, and Ian and Xavier hinted on this earlier. When you put slurry into a slurry tank, it produces methane. That methane is emitted to the atmosphere. Methane has a global warming potential 25 times that of CO2. So instead of storing your slurry in a slurry tank, if you put it into an anaerobic digester, some of it will leak out as methane. So if you leak 2% of the methane from a digester, and if you are combining that slurry with maize, you can still result in a carbon negative fuel at about minus 50 grams per megajoule. If you only use slurry, you're at minus 250 grams of CO2 per megajoule. And again, that is associated with the avoided methane emissions from not storing your slurry in a slurry pit. So looking at renewable gas, it can allow for decarbonisation across a number of sectors. Waste treatment, in terms of treating parkland wastes. It can also help to decarbonise agriculture itself. If you are an organic farmer, you can't use synthetic fertilisers. So you need to get a source of synthetic fertiliser or a source of renewable fertiliser so that your yield doesn't drop. The digestate from an anaerobic digester is better fertiliser than the slurry that goes into the digester. As well as that, you can also produce renewable energy so that if you've processing on site, it's still renewable. And as well as that, you can also use it to decarbonise big industry. Gosser is a brewery in Austria, and I think it meets about 40 to 50% of its thermal demand from the anaerobic digestion of byproducts in that brewery. Looking internationally, there is a growth in the amount of biogas upgrading that is taking place across the IEA Task 37 countries, predominantly in Germany, the UK, France and Sweden. So it's a growing area. An example of a biogas system would be one in Linköping in Sweden, which uses 7,000 tonnes per annum of pig slurry, along with 47,000 tonnes per annum of slaughter waste. Not nice things that you want lying around the place. It converts these wastes into biomethane, enough to power 65 buses, 10 waste collection lorries, 600 cars and a train. So it's essentially alchemy. You take something you don't want to see and don't want to smell and use it into something and turn it into something that is useful. Potential ways of producing biogas and the business models around them are interesting. One option is to go big. You have one big centralized plant. This is an example of a plant called Mabjörg, which processes 725,000 tons of feedstock a year, which is huge. If you build something this big, you're going to have issues with haulage on roads and traffic. So they decided to install pipelines to pipe slurry to the plant and pipe digestate away from the plant. So one potential model would be going big in a centralized manner. There are advantages and disadvantages. An alternative option would be decentralized production. Small farm-scale digesters or a number of farm-scale digesters producing biogas. This biogas can either be upgraded and hauled via the road, like Ian pointed out, or you can just pipe the biogas in low-pressure biogas pipelines to a centralized upgrading facility to produce biomethane. So there are a number of possible implementations. You can go big and centralized, or you can go small and decentralized. Which is best depends on what people classify as being best, whether it's community ownership, whether it's financial viability, or whether it's sustainability, or all three. Looking at Denmark again, currently there's about 10% renewable gas in the Danish grid, and they aim to have 72 petajoules of renewable gas by 2025. Reports state that they aim to reduce their natural gas consumption over time, and that would, to the point where it's essentially 100% green. If you add power to gas to this number, you can get up to 100 petajoules, and I'll touch on power to gas in a moment. Looking into the future, something that hasn't kind of been touched on is that blue economy, the sea that surrounds this island. Seaweed is actually quite a good source of biogas. You can cultivate seaweed next to fish farms and integrated multi-trophic aquaculture systems. The seaweed acts as a biofilter, which removes the fertilizer released by the fish farms. If you harvest your seaweed, it depends what you want to use it for. If you want to use it for energy, you can harvest it at a point in the year where you optimize your energy yield. If you want to harvest your seaweed for a high value product like alginate, carrageenan or hydrocolloids, you can harvest it at a different time. If the seaweed is of high quality and you can use it in a biorefinery to make a high value product, use it in a biorefinery to make a high value product because you can make more money that way. The residue, again, can be used in an anaerobic digester to produce biogas. Alternatively, if the seaweed is not of good quality, if there's issues with contamination in the water, you can ensoil the seaweed and make seaweed silage. We did this in our lab. And then run an anaerobic digester on that ensoiled seaweed throughout the year because you can only harvest your seaweed once. This sounds futuristic, but it's actually happening in a place called Solrod in Denmark. They use beach cast seaweed, so seaweed that washes up on the beach, and they use byproducts from a carrageenan production facility along with some other food processing wastes to produce biogas. Microalgae can also be used. You can grow microalgae using the CO2 in the digestate from an anaerobic digester. You would need a source of heat. If you could burn some of the resulting biogas to heat that microalgae pond, fantastic. Again, that microalgae can be used to produce high value products, whether it's bio-based fats, bio-based proteins, or omega-3 fatty acids. So this is kind of getting into the idea of a circular economy where the output of one system is the input of another system. You can digest a residue, make fertilizer, grow microalgae, digest the residue, make fertilizer, grow microalgae. The final bit I'll talk about is power to gas. So this is the amount of electricity from renewable sources in Ireland in 2018 that was curtailed downwards. So you can have wind turbines that are producing power, but that power can't be used for a number of reasons. Either it can't be moved from where it's produced to where it's needed, and that's dubbed constraint, or you produce it when there's no load, and that would be curtailment. So essentially this power is wasted at the moment. One option is to build an interconnector to France and ship the power that way. Another option is to implement a power to gas system. You can produce hydrogen from this surplus renewable electricity, use the hydrogen directly if the infrastructure is there, or combine that hydrogen with CO2 and pump it into the gas grid or into methane into compressed natural gas tanks and use it wherever you would use methane. And again, this is happening in a place called Wertel in Germany. They have a food waste digester that's processing food waste. They get an electrolyzer. The electrolyzer is turned on by the grid operator. The carbon dioxide from the upgrading system and the hydrogen are combined in a catalytic methanation process to produce biomethane that is injected into the gas grid and is bought by the owners of 1,000 Audi natural gas vehicles. In an Irish context, this is a potential future. On the left-hand side of the graph, you can see the energy consumption in transportation. And on the right-hand side of the graph, you can see the potential resource associated with different feedstocks in Ireland. If you focus in on the heavy goods vehicles, you can see that we could meet the entire demand of heavy goods transport in Ireland if we digest up to, let's say 80% of the slurry produced in the country. Now, realistically, that won't happen, but the scale of the resource that is available is significant. The same can be said for industrial energy consumption. If you look at the total energy consumption, gas, electricity, coal, peat, in the food processing sector, we can meet a significant portion of that through renewable gas if it fits. If a process can go to renewable electricity, let it go to renewable electricity. If a process can go to biomass, let it go to biomass. If there are processes that need natural gas, renewable gas is a viable alternative to it. So hopefully I haven't gone over time, and if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them during the panel.
So we're just coming up to the very last part of our discussion today. So could Xavier, if you could grab a seat, and just while they're taking the seat, just to comment that lunch will be brought in and brought to your tables, so you needn't get up. And if anyone needs the train, I think there are a couple of cars to bring people to the train station. It's leaving at 20 past. I think it's good to have the discussion here today. The European Commission just announced the intention to bring up the European greenhouse gas reduction targets to 55% by 2030 from the current target of 40%. So, and if you think your job wasn't hard enough, which is good, to bring us along to the Q&A session. So we'll have about 10 minutes of Q&A, and then we'll have lunch. So if there's any burning questions, John asked in here. Or could we get a mic, or just a microphone here to John Aston.
Well, they just mentioned that I'm going to send all the PowerPoints to everybody who registered.
So the PowerPoints will be circulated to everyone.
Yeah. Who registered? If I have your email address, if not, you can contact me.
John Aston from Legal Management. Ian, I guess what you're presenting there is a very advanced system where you need 5 to 11 or whatever farmers to be cooperating. Are there any baby steps to be had beforehand where we take the technology that's currently being rolled out in other parts of the world, mainly the developing world, where it's this technology where a local farmer can sort their own stuff out with a much going down a much cheaper road initially?
Yeah, you can hear me fine there. Where we're at, I suppose, is a reflection of the technologies. And I suppose optimally we're engaged with that scale at the moment because that's the optimum for the technologies. I'd probably point to a scenario that will be medium scale initially, just given that that's where it's at in the market and that we see the scale going down rather than up. The Danish model is literally the polar opposite of what we would be promoting. The Danish model is, like Richie was explaining, is really, really big plants. We don't have the road infrastructure in Ireland for that, for one thing, and building pipeline infrastructure is very expensive, so we don't see that as a scenario. But we do see a scenario that initially the market would be at a medium scale. It will support probably large scale farmers initially, clusters of farmers definitely, like Javier's feasibility study for Dingle. The scale of that is about half the minimum size we're talking about here, and we would see that as probably quite achievable in the time frame between concluding the feasibility study, completing detailed design. Bear in mind you're talking about at least 4 years out in the future, just being practical. We're actively engaged on technologies that will be very suitable for that scale, and even possibly smaller at that stage. So we'd be very comfortable saying that yes, the route to market will be medium scale, maybe even a couple of large scale initially, but actually decreasing in scale and time, and that will create more opportunities for the smaller communities and individual farmers.
It's worth mentioning we were involved in a separate feasibility study for a smart, let's say a farm scale, where there's food production on the farm with food waste available there, much smaller scale again, and again the challenge to find the breakthrough, to find the technology and the business model that will stack up.
Yeah, Kieran Cunnan from Galway Energy Cooperative. Just wondering on the economics of, the economics of transportation of the biogas. You mentioned Kildare and you mentioned the new sort of 50-kilometre radius scheme, and in terms of even looking at things like compressed air storage, moving energy around can have a knock-on, I suppose, impact on the financial model that underpins it. And a second question, if I'm allowed, which is to do with the LNG plant in Shannon. Surely it would make more sense to do bioenergy and hydrogen there, and do you see that as a feasible alternative?
On the transporting of natural gas, which the spec we're using, is quite efficient. So if you appreciate it in a 40-foot container with composite tanks, we can compress gas to 250 bar. We can transport, I believe it's about 95 megawatt hours per delivery. And the energy consumed by the vehicle, the tractor unit towing it, would be equivalent to 0.5% per 50 kilometres. So it's very efficient to move energy dense gas, if you know what I mean. Liquefied gas and you can actually, we are looking at projects to go liquefaction of biomethane. That's even more energy dense and even more cost effective to move, but the capital costs are too high at the moment. Certainly to your second point, obviously we're promoting renewable gas. We see that the scenario to achieve our 2050 targets will rely on 100% indigenous sources of gas ideally, and yes, there'll be routes to decarbonise gas with carbon capture and storage, but fundamentally it's the business case is all about being indigenous and displacing imports rather than being dependent on other alternative imports. So we see Ireland as having the capacity to supply 37% of our gas with biomethane sources very effectively, very sustainably. Other technologies like Richie was describing, like hydrogen conversion, and there are so many technology options that we have in that space, to be honest, that are very, very compatible, which would increase the biomethane potential for the country. We'd certainly get to greater than 50%. I would say that if based on demand, and bear in mind power generation will still be running on gas, we believe, even in 2050. The reality is there will still be a significant portion of natural gas consumed, and we believe the power gen sector will still be the dominant consumer of natural gas at that stage. We would see all of heat and all of transport being running totally on renewable gas only. And for those guys, probably the cheapest source of natural gas they can get, and a carbon capture and storage solution is probably what they'll most likely use.
The fracked gas is a higher carbon footprint than coal.
Yeah, totally true, you know what I mean. So obviously it depends on your source. So the full life cycle assessment of source of gas, it's kind of a gas field to wheel if it's a transport use, or gas field to meter if it's a heat use. Full LCA has to be carried out, and obviously a fracked gas source is more carbon intensive than a non-fracked or a deep well solution. I personally would think that there's a lot more deep well solutions, and bear in mind our European network is connected all the way across Europe, and there's a lot of other gas fields there. We cross the Mediterranean down to North Africa, so there is decades and decades of deep well natural gas available. Fracked gas by nature is kind of, if you imagine, deep well gas is, it was biogas millions of years ago that from our dinosaur population back then. Fracked gas is kind of the same, but it's actually only hundreds of thousands of years old. So it's a newer form of gas, and in reality it's probably best to be left down there for future generations rather than utilise too much of it.
Take a question over here.
Killian Murphy, Councillor on the Clare County Council. I was interested, Richie, to hear from your
So when you look at beach cast seaweeds, there are three types of seaweed. There's red, green, and brown. Is it Ulvalactuca is the one that is it sea lettuce that keeps washing up, or is it? Yeah. Is it brown stuff? Yeah. That's actually quite a good source of biogas for an anaerobic digester. Ideally, you would if you were to build a seaweed biogas industry, and the legalities of this I'm not quite sure about. You'd harvest it at a time where the biogas yield is highest. If it washes up, you're kind of stuck with when you get it, and you can incite it. In our lab, we made silage out of seaweed. Some of them worked very well, some of them didn't work at all, and they absolutely stank. But when you incite it, you can that means that you can prolong the amount of time you can feed that seaweed to a digester. So instead of feeding X hundred tons to a digester in a week, you could clamp it in a silage clamp and then feed it slowly over a period of time, along with cattle slurry, along with grass silage. And in our lab, we have co-digested seaweed with cattle slurry, actually. There's Laminaria digitata mixed with cattle slurry. So it does work, and yeah, you basically clamp it and feed it in with the rest of it.
Thanks, Paul. Brendan Healy, my name is Chairman of Irish Wind Farmers Association. A little slightly off topic, but I do hear mention of carbon capture and storage, which usually gets my attention. Does anybody realistically think we're going to store gas indefinitely anywhere? I just find that many in the audience will have seen the video on television of the gas escaping from a storage unit in, I think it was California. I just don't know that that's a very clever idea, leaving that to our next 100,000 generations. So if we store it in liquid form, maybe. If we store it in solid form, I think maybe like the Cliffs of Dover or something, that would be okay. But storing in gas form, I don't know that should really be part of this equation, in my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, and bear in mind, I'm not an expert in the geological storage, but we have completed quite a few studies around the gas fields off Cork, the old Kinsale fields. There's 7 gas fields off of Kinsale. 2 of them are very low pressure at this stage. They would have started their life at about, I think it was 70 or 80 bar pressure. And at this stage they're nearly fully depleted and they're down to nearly, I think it's only about 5 bar. So in essence, based on geological assessment, it would show that in a gaseous form CO2 would work very well in those kind of fields because geologically they were gaseous to begin with, they were never in liquid form. Liquid CO2 is typically only suited to very, very deep wells that would have been, that the pressure is so significant that the methane would have been in a liquid form to begin with, if you know what I mean. And we don't have any examples of those kind of fields anyway, so it's just, we don't have the option to consider it. However, our Norwegian colleagues would have a lot of deep sea former natural gas wells that would have had the original methane in a liquid form, so they would look at liquefied CO2 as being incompatible for those kind of wells, if you know what I mean. That's a very high level view, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a geologist.
That just presumes the seal is going to work for the next million years.
Yeah, indeed, and I suppose the methane got in there in the first place because it was retained for millions of years, if you know what I mean. So, oh yeah, all of it. That's it.
I'm going to time the discussion out because it's. I think there's a lot. I know the European Commission put up roughly about €1 billion over the last 15 years for research and development on carbon capture and storage, and I think it will be something that it will be researched and so on, but I wouldn't pin our future hopes on it just yet. We have another question here.
No, I was just going to add, as a geologist, there has been an awful lot of research done, and I suppose as Ian alluded to, gas that was in, say for example, Kinsale Head gas field has been down there for about 45 million years. So we do, the seal, as you said, does that still have integrity as well? It has been altered from its virgin state due to the wells going in and different things, decompression, recompression of the gas field. But like every kind of industry in the world, the oil and gas industry is one of the strictest with safety regulations, and it's not something that would be pumped down there for any sake. And the tests that we have done so far on the carbon capture and storage aspect, there are actually secondary cap rocks, which is part of the EU legislation. So it can't just be one cap rock, there has to be 2. So it does seem like in the future it's going to be quite a safe renewable aspect for us as well.
And that leads us neatly into lunch, everyone. So
Urban capture.
Thank you very much to the panel. There we are.
Up to Dublin.